Prologue. Baneblademufactorumcciv. Utopia Planitia, Holy Mars 00336339, M39. 1,000 trip hammers rang out the birth of war's child, the bringer of ruin, the mightiest battle tank in the galaxy. Baneblade, 15 meters long, as tall as 3 men, a moving fortress, hammer of the God Emperor, bearer of firepower to equal a squadron of lesser tanks. But not yet, not yet. This one was a shell, bereft of tooth and claw, gaping ports where guns should be, tracks limp. No energy flowed through its conduits, no fuel through its pipes. Not for long, for now began the ceremony of activation. The steady drone of 5 score throats singing in chorus built to a crescendo. Mighty chains rattled as scores of men dragged hard, stripped to the waist in the heat, furnace light glinting from their shaven skulls, shadowing the numerals branded into their foreheads. The work gangs pulled the machine through the final stages of the production line upon a mighty sled, towards the culmination of a year-long process in a forge that covered half a continent. Ruddy, incandescent light caught planes of armor as machines older than memory hammered in searing rivets. The grinding and roaring and hissing of automated systems competed with the chants of the tech priests and the shouts of laboring tech adepts. Libations sizzled on cooling plasteel, parchment prayers curled and blackened as they were affixed to the hull, wax ran on hot steel. A man, or what had once been a man, stood atop a baroque motor carriage to the fore of the chorus and led the chant, lesser tech adepts behind him, all robed in cloth the color of old blood, mirroring his words in the twittering binary language of machines, its meanings the deepest of arcane secrets. Words dragged from aged throats and teased from vox boxes grafted to withered flesh rumbled a glorious litany to the cog and the gear. The cowls of victory, shouted the Magos, breaking into the tongue of High Gothic. The housings of the weapons of righteousness. Blessed be the children of the machine. The others echoed him, red hoods covering altered faces. Behind them, a choir of servitors droned praise. All were dwarfed by the machine. A vat-grown homunculus scattered sacred oils upon the hull and the dozens of cyborgs, workers and tech adepts laboring upon it. Twisted cherubs swung senses, sacred smoke mixing with the stink of hot metal as machine spirits guided giant arms to attach armored cupolas to either side of the great tank. Servitors with bolt drivers in place of limbs moved forwards. Bolts whirred home, the arms and the machine men retreated. Spider-like welders darted in from above, swinging with precision on long, cabled brachia suspended from the roof high above. They spat and shifted, closing gaps with terse arclight. Tech priests and servitors connected cables amidst darting assembly drones, running auspex and chanting blessings as the Baneblade received the housings for its deadly instruments. The tank ground forwards upon its plasteel sled, runners squealing on the tracks of the line, work gangs chanting as they pulled it to the next stage of creation, one step closer to birth. The teeth of victory, shouted the Magos, his inhuman visage glinting deep within the shadowed folds of his robes. The hammers of the Emperor's foes. Heavy bolt gun, patterned by Lucian manufacture, intoned the Magos. His implanted logic engines emanated fat data streams bearing detailed specifications of all parts as he spoke. Subsidiary augmenters studying the length of his mechadendrites chittered the same through the air in hasty binary, those of his inferiors responded. Blessed be he who uncovers the truth, groaned the cyborg choir. Screeching roars of orally broadcast data streams accompanied them. Lascanon, timeless, born of dark times, master of the lights of death, Mars created, Primus standard template construct pattern, continued the Magos in High Gothic. Bolter, heavy, LXV Lucius type. Swift-winged oblivion shalt thou spit, tungsten-capped, solid-fueled. He slipped deep into an ecstatic trance as he called the names of the guns intended for the tank before him, blueprints flickering out through his augmenters to enlighten those around him. As their names were invoked, each of the lesser weapons was brought forth upon an ornate carriage attended by more droning tech magi, veiled in sacred oilcloth inscribed with holy mysteries too terrible to contemplate, and arrayed about the vehicle. At various points in the last year, each weapon had been singly fitted, tested, retested and removed. Today, the day of activation, all would be mounted together for the first and last time. For 6 weeks the tech priests had been working in shifts, anointing catch and gimbal, praying as they smoothed away burrs of metal, raising praise to the machine god as each screw was driven home. Now, the flesh-bound servants of the Omnitia worked quickly, fitting the fangs and claws of this most terrible of beasts, crooning sweet benedictions to the machine's quiescent spirit, lest it awaken early and incomplete, and consume them all in a fury. The machine's auxiliary weapon systems in place, many of the tech adepts retreated, their cyborg slaves clanking dutifully after them, unaltered workers scurrying in their wake. Battle cannon, Vulcan named, death to the unclean. So spoke the Magos. Down came a claw, its grasp seeming mighty enough to clasp a world in unyielding ceramite and shake it all to pieces. In a cradle of plasteel talons rested the main armament of the tank. Following behind in the tender embrace of a second claw came the tank's secondary weapon. Battle cannon, demolisher cannon. The Magos named them both and incanted their specifications. The barrel of the first was 10 meters long, capable of hurling rocket-propelled shells over kilometers. The second was shorter, sturdier, wider mouthed. Its munitions could shatter ferrocrete. The shockwaves alone would turn a man to paste. Carefully, the claws of the cathedral factory lowered their deadly cargo. Gently, the tech priests guided the weapons, directing teams of slack-mouthed servitors and branded workers to tug at chain and tackle, aligning the weapons carefully with their housings. When the work gangs were positioned, the Magos nodded. Adepts at the heads of each crew dropped crimson flags. As one, the servitors heaved. The barrels slid into place, the slam of plasteel and clack of bolts engaging announcing their successful situation. Within the Baneblade others worked, welding, riveting, anointing and praying. Electronic conduits were coupled and opened, the flow of electricity praised and coaxed, resistances tested, switches primed. Energy poured into still machinery, bringing it to life, found it worthy and was shut off, the adepts satisfied. 2 days passed. Around the tank, activity built to a frenzy as the time of activation came near. Hundreds of sweating men pulled hard on hawser and chain, dragging pallets of components, armor plates and external systems towards the unfinished Baneblade. Graspers and claws wired to disembodied human brains attached cupola and hatch, periscope glass and handle. Tech priests watched carefully through servo skulls swarming like flies about the hull, checking and documenting the entirety of the process in case the unthinkable happened and the machine did not activate as it should. To lie there stillborn and cold, an affront to the omniscient. Reckoning must be made in such a circumstance. Pattern, code and number, bellowed the Magos. Soft squeals of ones and zeros announced the same. All 8 of his additional articulated limbs rose heavenwards to wave in a serpentine dance as he slammed the base of his ceremonial cog-toothed axe rhythmically upon the floor, setting up a clanging in time with his words. The tech priests and servitors took up the refrain with their tools and implants until the air vibrated with metallic thunder. From somewhere high up, far, far from the most holy factory floor, a bell began to sound, counting time to the roar and squeak of audible data shouts. Fashioned from the melted armor of 4,000 holy war machines, fallen in service to the Emperor, it tolled loud enough to alert the Lord of Terror himself, telling him that a new champion was born to him. Baneblade. The first is Mars, let that be thy pattern, as it is your home. The second is 47-93772, let that be thy number. The third is 033639, Millennium 39, Terran Checksum 0. Let that be thy inception code. Slowly, slowly, the tank moved forwards. Work gangs had come and gone, cycling through shifts. The men kept fresh so the machine would keep its speed precise through the last meters of the line. The final machines approached and caressed the tank. The final work teams took up their tasks. Then, it was done. The Baneblade, completed, passed under a festoon of oilcloths and parchments, of flimsies and blueprints, the blessings of the ages of ancient, holy knowledge, preserved by the Omnitia for the Adeptus Mechanicus alone. Let there be spoken the rites of activation. Shout forth the hymns of awakening. Supplicate the machine god. Bellowed the Magos, his voice, data shouts, and augments growing through cunning means to swallow the din around it. I call the Magos activator. Call the Magos activator, echoed the choir, and ceased. The tolling of the making bell and the clatter and bang of more distant manufactory processes took its place. The tank ticked as it cooled. The eyeless face of an autoscribe, part machine, part cadaver, looked on, metal fingers scratching pen on spooling parchments, recording every detail of the ceremony. A delegation of high-ranking tech priests walked forwards, a wizened torso upon a spider-legged carriage at their head, the Magos activator and his followers. 10 deeply cowled acolytes, hands and manipulators hidden in their sleeves, were borne to the side on a palanquin of carved zinc carried on heavy treads. With the faintest impact, the platform came to a rest against the top of the war machine's track guards. One by one the adepts crossed the hull, ascended the turret, and went within, there to take the stations that would one day be filled by the warriors of the Imperial Guard, the 10 men who would crew it to war. Clearly, The Magos activator spoke the rites of activation, while runes and mysteries were painted upon the Baneblade's motive parts in oils of utmost sanctity, and the 10 within tested the machine's controls, while 4 diagnosticians pored over a bank of ornate green screens outside, a bundle of cables snaking up and into the tank through its forward hull hatch. For an hour the prayers went on, the murmuring of the activation team growing into song, until gradually the servitors picked up the chant again. Tension built. Eventually, the Magos activator and his coterie stepped back. He nodded once to the High Magos. It was done. Awaken, called the High Magos. Machine spirit, I call upon thee. To life, to life. Awaken, he bellowed. Prime the pumps. Engage the generators. Start the engine. Within, the adepts worked at the tank stations. First, second and third gunner. First, second and third loader. Driver, tech adept aspirant, commander, commsman, pressed buttons and pulled levers, sibilant prayers on their lips. The power plant of the Baneblade clicked as it turned over. Then it roared, higher and higher and higher as the diagnosticians outside tested its torque and fuel to energy conversion ratios. Armament whined as it rotated. The turret turned, battle cannon and coaxial autocannon rising to full elevation and back again. Its hull-mounted demolisher cannon swiveled this way and that, the twin-linked heavy bolter in the small turret to its right following its movements. The remote weapons banks in the cupolas on the tank's sides whirred with activity. These sponsons were positioned midway down the vehicle on the outer track guards, twin-linked heavy bolters in each, single lascannons contained within miniature turrets atop both. Inside, mechanisms and screens sprang into life, bathing the interior of the tank in holy machine light. Tactical displays, targeting banks, comms equipment, all glowed and chatted, reeling off information. Wizened fingers caressed screens and buttons, purpose-built manipulators keyed into ports. One by one, the 10 men within sang off the holy words of functionality, naming the machines and their intent. Activated, each called, at the end of his litany, and so the next would begin his chant, and conclude, activated, until all were done, and the High Magos activator informed. All systems engaged. Blessed be the Omnitia, he intoned. Outside the tank, the prelate master of diagnostics, a bloated mass of flesh married to a mess of cables, rose up from his bank of logic engines arrayed about him in stepped ranks like the boards of an organ. All systems operate within normal parameters, O High One. Engine function optimal. Systems nominal and ready for command. Weapons primed. A leathery tongue licked thin lips. Does it live? Asked the High Magos. It lives, replied the prelate, and bowed his head in affirmation. Holy life, cog and gear, sang the High Magos. Blessed be the Omnitia. Blessed be the Omnitia, echoed the servitors. Your pattern, code and number shall be entered into the Liber Armorum Magnus, chanted the High Magos, now directly addressing the newborn engine of war. As shall your name. He paused. He bent low to a scroll borne by a blue-skinned vat child, a roller-meter thick, bearing the names of tens of thousands of Baneblades, born from this forge down innumerable centuries. I name thee Mars Victorious, Mars Triumphant. The choir reached a crescendo. The bell tolled. The autoscribe scratched the name into its annals beside the names of its forebears. And so Mars Triumphant was born. Its engine roared approval of its name. Its turrets tracked across the room, as if its auger eyes were already keen to seek the enemies of mankind. The children of the machine god gave thanks to their all-knowing master in thunderous reply. Inside the belly of the beast, a low-ranking tech adept, young and yet to receive his data core, carefully placed a brass plaque against a decorated panel the size of a tombstone, and with slow, reverent twists of his screwdriver, attached it to the wall. The plaque would remain blank until Mars Triumphant's field trials were completed and it was deployed to one of the Imperium's battlefronts. It awaited the name of Mars Triumphant's first commander, the being of flesh who would guide this being of plasteel to protect the worlds of humanity. Metal and flesh, tank and crew, machine god and emperor, together in the greater service of mankind, as was right. Thus had it always been in the Imperium of man. The final work gang led the tank away, chains slack, tracks turning under their own power. The Magos turned his palanquin upon its mechanical legs and, acolytes and work gangs trudging behind, headed back to the beginning of the activation run, where another unfinished machine awaited completion. Behind it, another, and behind that, another still, and then another and another, stretching back further than the eye could see on a factory floor that followed the curve of the planet. Truly, the holy work of the Omnitia was never done, and the High Magos's mechanical heart sang with the joy of that. Chapter 1. KALIDARIV, KOSTOVAL Flats, 3,265,397, M41. Mars triumphant sat upon a darkened plain, engines quiet, drawn up in readiness for the coming battle. For nearly 2 years it had lain in its cradle within the depths of a transport barge. Tomorrow it would assail the orcs of Kaladar. The tank rocked in time with the barrage. Shells flung by artillery batteries 10 kilometers behind the tank's position, falling onto the orc army still kilometers ahead. Honored Lieutenant Courtine felt rather than heard the distant thunder through the Baneblade's armor as a steady metronome of destruction. Fine veils of Kaladar's ever-present dust sifted down from the tank's ceiling with every explosion. 3 days on Kaladar, and already Mars triumphant was being asked to fight. Courtine was unconcerned by the speed of the deployment. He understood this as his duty. If the tank had been asked, and could have replied, Courtine was sure it would hold similar sentiments. But the new regiments, raised on Courtine's home world of Paragon, trained as they made their slow, dangerous way through the warp to Kaladar. He was not so sure he could say the same of them. Instinct told him that they needed more time, that this rush to smash the orc force besieging the mine complex of Urta was unwise. There was little he could do about that. Tomorrow, the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company would form the linchpin of one of 2 large arrow-headed tank formations, the remainder of them made up of Lemon Russ squadrons and mechanized infantry, the 2 formations part of a large action involving men from 3 worlds. 100 tanks, 4 regiments of infantry, a surprise for the orcs besieging Urta at the heart of the Lorelei-rich Costoval Flats. That was the idea. Courtine was suspicious of ideas like this. Perhaps the thick armor of Mars Triumphant had made him cautious, inclined to sit things out, he thought, behind the fortress-like walls of the Baneblade. Maybe, but as they said at home, one does not weather a storm by casting oneself into the sea. Courtine stood before Mars Triumphant's dimly lit wall of honor, near the reactor, the plant at the heart of the Baneblade. Names on brass plaques filled the wall almost entirely, a proud list ending with his own. The green and red glows emitted by Mars Triumphant's dim lights struck strange reflections from the metal, alternately revealing and obscuring the heroisms of the tank's long past. The first plaque was worn smooth by time to leave, but traces of archaic battle honors and the curve of what might have been an S or a G perhaps, thought Courtine. Other commanders of Mars Triumphant had stood here like he did before every engagement, their fingers tracing out the names of those who had come before them. How many times had he stood there? He did not know, the battles and campaigns of 30 years blurring into one endless war, a lifetime of conflict. Such was the sacrifice the Emperor had demanded of him. It was a sacrifice Courtine bore gladly. He'd give his life over again, and again a score of times, having seen what he had seen. Humanity was besieged as surely as the orcs out there in the desert besieged the Lorelei mine complex. If it were not for the sacrifice of men like him. But there were men like him, many men, the passing of some remembered on this wall, and so the Imperium would stand. He had faith in the Emperor and his servants. Still he felt fear at his own end, its edge dull and worn by experience and hard-won courage, present nevertheless. He heard a faint scuff behind him and glanced back. Crimson robes moved in the shadows, deeper shadows within the hood. Engineer Adept Brasslock, Courtine said. He returned his attention to the wall. Honored Lieutenant Courtine, said the other. He whispered as a priest does in a cathedral, his low voice hard to make out over the hiss of artificial lungs. I saw your bodyguard outside and assumed you were within. But I did not hear you approach. In this machine you are as quiet as a monk in a cloister. The engineer gave forth the mechanical cough that passed for his laugh. And that I am, in here, within Mars Triumphant. Any of the adepts of Mars are but supplicants before such a machine. You hold your vigil. Courtine nodded distractedly. As always. It calms me. After all these years, you need calming? Brasslock's voice held the smile his face could no longer show. You and I are old men, Courtine. Surely the battle fear has left you now. Never, said Courtine. If it ever does, then I shall be dead. No man can ever conquer the fear of battle, and it is not wise to try. Standing here helps hold it at bay, turn it outwards, use it. To know the machine god and the Emperor watch over you, that is what calms you, and it should, said the other, certain in his pronouncement. Many of your predecessors, the ones that I have known, have felt the same. No, it is not that. Courtine shook his head, checked himself, not wishing this one night to offend the seer, whose faith was somewhat stronger and deeper than his own. Not entirely. He turned to the engineer. Brasslock stood easily within the narrow confines of the main gangway leading from the gunnery deck. Courtine had no idea how old he was. Despite his stealth, he suspected Brasslock was ancient, as the followers of the Omnisphere often were. His flesh hand, the left, was wizened as centuried leather, blotched with spots and scars. It was impossible to tell what color the man's skin had originally been. Brasslock rested this hand on the open bulkhead door, idly stroking plasteel as a mother might soothe her child. Metal glinted in the hood where his mouth should be. A thin, articulated tendril snuck out from under his robes from time to time, tasted the air and wickered back within. His right arm ended in a heavy metal stump, a broad socket ready to accept tools, for the moment empty. To a normal man's eyes he was a grotesque, but Courtine had long ceased to find Engine Seer Brasslock disturbing. "What then do you find here in the heart of Mars Triumphant?" said the Engine Seer. "Watching the march of the names through time makes me confident. Near 1,000 years of battle, and this machine still fights. So many battles, tomorrow is merely one more. That is why it calms me." "The spirit of Mars Triumphant is strong," agreed the Engine Seer. They both fell silent, the close silence of the tank disturbed by the distant bombardment and the hiss-whir of Brasslock's mechanical lungs, the two sounding in time, a pair of impacts for every breath. "I wonder," said Courtine eventually. "I wonder who he was." He nodded at the first plaque, the brass shiny where it had been rubbed away, the edges deepened to a luster richer than gold. Verdigris scaled the base of the rivets. Who was this first man to stand here? Did he come to look at his own name affixed to this wall as I do now and wonder at those who would follow? "I do not know," said Brasslock. "Men have forgotten as this metal has forgotten." He pointed with a skeletal finger. "But the machine god does not forget. The flesh is weak, the Omnisphere is not. He knows all." Courtine smiled tiredly. "Perhaps you can ask him for me sometime, I would like to know." Brasslock took Courtine's blasphemy with good grace. "Alas, it is not my place to do so, honored Lieutenant Courtine, but the data is kept by crystal, pen and chisel in Mars's archives. You can be assured that the Omnisphere remembers all the men who serve him, as he will remember you." "That is not as comforting as you might think it sounds." "I did not mean it for comfort, honored Lieutenant." From deep within Mars Triumphant some subsystem or other grumbled, a pulsing thrum of interrupted energy flow, 3 beats in contretemps to the barrage outside. "Ah, see, she agrees. Mars Triumphant is inactive. They dream when they sleep, honored Lieutenant, as men do. Listen." The artificial thunder had ceased. The ground shuddered hard, once, as if in pain. The charms Brasslock and generations of Engine Seers before him had affixed to the wall of honor jangled in reply. A final shower of dust patted onto the pitted floor of the tank, then the world became still. "The barrage, it is done." The Engine Seer's shadowy face looked up within his hood, rheumy eyes glinting. "I must rouse the spirit of Mars Triumphant. The other machines of the company must also be propitiated," said the Engine Seer. "I have much work to do to ensure optimum functionality of all systems for the morrow." "Of course." The Engine Seer inclined his head in a bow and departed, vanishing into the gloom to the aft of the tank. Courtine reached out to the plaques on the wall and reverently touched the oldest as was his habit, wearing it away atoms at a time, an erosion born of respect. He put on his cap, lifted the mask of his rebreather from the case hanging on his front, a necessary evil. He didn't want to end his career coughing up his own lungs thanks to the dust. He buckled the foul thing about his face and went up onto the command deck, up again into the turret, and then out into the freezing desert dawn. Chapter 2. KALIDARIV, KOSTOVAL flats 3,267,397, M41. Morning. Battle had begun. The Imperial advance, entirely mechanized, swept across the plains towards the Orc siege lines. Around the Lemon Russes and the Chimeras, the Baneblades and the Salamanders and the other armored vehicles of the assault, a storm of shocking ferocity raged, masking their approach, but playing havoc with communications. Star, Asian, Com, S, Itical. Storm is worsening. Lieutenant Coloron Artem Low Bannock's ears rang with Kaladar's electrostatic roar. The directions keeping the 3rd Company of the 42nd Paragon Tank Regiment's echelon true garbled beyond comprehension. In conditions like this, even with the Lemon Russ battle tanks so close to one another, short-range Voxcasters barely worked, while the comm suite's logic engine had become a lump of inert brass and plastics that did nothing but take up space. Kaladar appreciated no other voice than her own. Sig. A. 317. Keep. Formation. Curtail. U. Squadron. Andering to the left. The Vox crackled, a stream of gibberish that might once have been an order rushing out. Say again, command, say again. Bannock's finger clicked off the speaking horn. Nothing but screeching came in reply. Damn storm's getting worse. Bannock hunched over the command suite of his Lemon Russ Indomitable Fury and checked his squadron's positioning against the overall plan. All bar the simplest instruments showed some kind of effect from the planet's chaotic magnetosphere, but as far as he could tell they were still in formation. The glass bulbs positioned round the circumference of the Lemon Russ's vision block were sandblasted opaque by the planet's accursed dust, revealing only an undifferentiated yellowish blur that could have been sky or ground. The tank's augers were not much better, screens rippling with actinic ghosts. Thankfully the periscope had been fitted with a cover, or they'd stay blind. He dared not open that yet. He'd learned from veterans of the campaign that supplies could be months in coming. To lose the periscope would be a disaster. Indomitable Fury bucked and geared underneath him. Gunner Patinallo glanced up at Bannock from the seat below and to the right of his own, the massive breech block of the battle cannon like a threat between them. Squadron 3, keep your tanks in line. Bannock shouted into the speaking horn in an effort to make himself heard over the roar of the engine. I don't want my name read out over the Vox like that idiot Curtail. Keep us in formation. Small auger screens showed him his crew, 5 men. His driver Kurlik, grim-faced and squinting as he wrestled the tank over the soft sand of Kaladar, as blind to what lay ahead as Bannock, Patinallo and the loader Brevant, viewed from an auger eye at the front of the tank. Arleson and Tovan, his sponson gunners, one so stoic as to appear petrified, the other mumbling prayers and repeatedly wiping sweat from his hands. He'd been angered when his squadron had not been given the duty of going in first at the head of their echelon. That honor had gone to Verlanik. His Lemon Russ, Willful Destruction, had been fitted with 3 heavy bolters in its sponsons and hull mount. These would be firing until they glowed red as the tank hit the enemy, the rest of his squadron on his flanks, covering his charge with their battle cannons. All the glory a man could wish for. He envied Verlanik that, even though the survival of the tank and crew was rated at less than 15%, it should have been him. The short odds of the point position were no less than he deserved. He shook himself. Envy was not a virtue worthy of the Paragonian clan nobility. Bannock blew out his cheeks, sweat trickling into his eyes, stinging it. His face itched with grime and salt. He wiped his face. The external screens cleared a little. The pictures remained grainy and jagged with interference patterns, but at least he could see. A lull in the storm, Emperor be praised. Unconsciously he reached up his hand and pressed at the twin medallions under his shirt, the Aquila and the Cog, side by side, as worn by all the manufacturing aristocracy of Paragon. The left screen showed a vast expanse of desert, billows of dust from the tanks in front whirling across it. The view to the front and the right was less clear. Plumes of the stuff kicked high by the preceding Lemon Russ's treads, one of the 2 in his squadron besides his own Indomitable Fury. The third was practically invisible, further out still, its shape lost in the storm. The whole company labored on a dune as high as a mountain, all 10 battle tanks struggling for purchase as they fishtailed their way up to the summit. The tanks were in a formation designated as Solon's Axe, a Tactica Imperium standard attack mode with trailing edges and a broad, flat front. The 3rd company of the 42nd Paragonian Armored Regiment's job was to cover the left. Out on their right, hundreds of meters away, ran the 2nd company, tasked with the protection of that flank. The fire arcs were seriously restricted by the formation, but that was not important. They were forming a moving wall, a mobile fortress, protecting and supporting the machines in the middle of the 2 companies. In between the Lemon Russes lumbered the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company, 4 mechanical monsters of prodigious size and power. Their names leapt into Bannock's mind: the Baneblade Artemon Ultras, the Hellhammer Ostracan's Rebirth, the Shadowsword Lux Imperator, and the Baneblade Mars Triumphant. These were true fists of the Emperor. Somewhere behind the tank axe rode 30 squads of the 63rd Paragonian Mechanized and 14th Savler Light Infantry, crammed into Chimera armored carriers, waiting to leap out and exploit the gap the tanks were to create. They completed the Beta Group. Formation Alpha was of similar composition and rode a few kilometers away, both formations converging on the weakest spot on the Orc siege line. The Orcs had dug themselves in, fighting running battles under and over the ground for more than 2 months with the Lorelei miners and the troops detailed to support them. This attack was intended to break that siege. The Lemon Russ echelons at the sides of the axes would hit first. The super heavy tanks, slower and more ponderous than the smaller battle tanks, would then advance and destroy the Orcs and their fortifications in between the Lemon Russ echelons across a front perhaps a kilometer wide. Once the Orcs' lines of trenches had been penetrated by the tank formations, other elements of the Imperial Guard were to move up and exploit the whole, while heavy bombardment pinned down the flanks of the Greenskin horde, preventing reinforcements. Caught between the tanks and mechanized infantry in the rear, the miners and the troops stationed in the mine to their front and a rain of high explosive fire to either side, the Orcs would be annihilated. Bannock desired to serve the Emperor in battle. If he were to die, so be it. But there were 1,000 pointless ways to end one's days here on Kaladar before you came within sight of the foe. Swift dust, radiation, temperature fluctuations and the ever-present danger of dust lung from the razor-sharp sand of the place. Right now the biggest threat was swift dust. If a tank went into a patch of that, it wasn't going to come out again. This sector of the front had been declared free of swift dust by Munitorum ordinators, but that meant nothing. Kaladar was treacherous, the dust moved quickly. "The Emperor protects the bold," he muttered. "Just don't let me die in some damn sinkhole. That's all I ask. If I am to die, let my death count." He was jounced out of his thoughts as the engine pitch shifted and the tank heeled to the right and leaned back. His back pressed uncomfortably into the equipment round his chair as Indomitable Fury hung at a 60-degree angle for an impossibly long second, and he was forced to grasp at his station to steady himself. Through the scoured glass, the color of the world outside became lighter as the tank reared up into the sky. "We're going over," shouted Kurlik. "We're going over. 3rd Squadron, stay in line," Bannock shouted into the horn. The tank toppled forwards and hit the down slope. Bannock gripped his seat rails as his helmet rang off the vision port casing before him. The tank's engine howled as it picked up speed, hammering down the dune, slewing from side to side like a snake on the sand. "Stay together," Company Captain Malliant's voice, fighting over the roar of static and engines. "Enemy in IGHT. Time to impact is..." His voice died away, Kaladar's angry scream overwhelming him. "Wait for my..." This was it. Contact. The first engagement. 2 years in the warp, 3 days in the desert, right off the dropship. Finally, a chance to prove himself. "Squadron, prepare to slow to combat speed," ordered Bannock. His blood thundered loud enough to compete with the tank's engine. "Patinalo." "Yes, sir." "Prepare to open fire with main armament," Bannock said, then added, "That's if you can see anything in this mess." He debated with himself. "I'm opening the hatch. Masks on." He fastened his stinking rebreather over his mouth, a heavy, rubbery respiration mask wretched with the reek of his own breath and sweat. Hoses snaking behind the command chair in the turret attached it to the filter system, a bulky machine taking up more than its fair share of the tank's already cramped interior. Bannock had the others sign off to make sure they had attached their masks before he grasped the lever above his head, twisted, and flung the hatch backwards. Outside was a maelstrom. Kaladar's wind, never quiescent, keened ferociously through the fittings of Indomitable Fury. Dust stung his face round his breather and goggles. Although Indomitable Fury was practically new, built when the regiment was raised, already the sand had begun to strip the tank's paint. He'd heard of more than one man stepping out to be blinded before putting his goggles on. Such men were shot. The commissars could not rule out the possibility that they had allowed themselves to be rendered unfit for duty. As Kurlik struggled to keep Indomitable Fury on an even course, Bannock steadied himself on the tank's turret rail. Out to his right he could make out the shape of Company Captain Malliant's Vanquisher, protected on the inside of the echelon. Some distance to his left a thicker cloud of dust told him the position of the 4th and 5th Company's axe formation, more super heavies at its heart, the Atraxian 18th, moving in parallel to them. He could see nothing of the tanks themselves, as massive as they were. He could barely make out the other 2 tanks in his own squadron, their blocky forms obscured by plumes of sand churned up by 10 sets of tracks. His ears throbbed, the Vox noise scrabbled at his concentration, the wind competing with that and the thundering engines of half a tank regiment. There was something else there too, a noise not of Kaladar. He sought after it, lost it, grew frustrated, and tore his headphones off. Sand instantly infiltrated his ears, but without the static-filled comms chatter, he could hear the noise more clearly, a rising falling, as of surf beating the shore, though the last ocean of Kaladar had dried millennia ago. He squinted through the veils of sand whipping towards him. The chant grew louder. A dune obscured the view half a kilometer ahead. The formation was quickly up and over, Bannock bracing himself against the turret edge as Kurlik took the ridge at speed. More than one tank commander had been killed by internal injuries sustained while in transit over Kaladar's unforgiving terrain. The wind shrieked, the chant was momentarily drowned, and then it was back on, low and guttural. Skirls of sand whispered up and over Fury's bulk, veils of dust swept in and over him, and suddenly the visibility cleared enough for Bannock to see the blurry outline of Kaladar's fierce blue sun. The shapes around him resolved themselves into tanks. He peered forwards. About 3 kilometers out over the saltpan of a long dead sea was a dark wall, a jagged line hard against the desert, thousands upon thousands of orcs, all chanting in one savage voice. "Throne," said Bannock. "They know we're coming. They've come out from their trenches." The shapes of crude war machines punctuated the orcish ranks, studding the horde with jagged islands of metal. There was little standardization to them, each different in some way to its fellows. As the task force drew nearer to the orcs, the lurid colors of their armor, equipment and clothing grew brighter and brighter. They were loosely organized into great mobs of towering warriors, each clutching at unwieldy alien weapons. There seemed to be little hierarchy to them. Heavy weapons were scattered amid their ranks, clanking walkers waving pincers and saws stomping backwards and forwards. A howl went up from the greenskins as they caught sight of the tanks. Instantly the maws of their war machines flashed fire, the pop and crackle of cannon reports sounding moments later. "Incoming!" shouted Bannock, hoping that the Vox pickup in his mask had not malfunctioned again. Deafening whistles and screaming thrums filled the air, followed by explosions as shells impacted the desiccated seabed and heaved up columns of earth high in Kaladar's low gravity. One landed in the center of the formation, completely hiding Malian's command tank behind a fountain of dirt. A lemon Russ further ahead caught a glancing hit from a second shell. A track whipped free, the tank pivoting around its uninjured side and coming to a stop, flanked to the enemy. Within moments the turret had rotated to face the orcs and returned fire. The following vehicles snaked round it and carried on. Bannock recognized the lemon Russ as Keniston's senior sergeant in the 1st Squadron. Already he'd landed 2 shots in the orcs' ranks. Smoothly done, thought Bannock. Bannock ducked inside, slammed the hatch and replaced his headphones. Dust poured in after him. The tank's off-white interior, near pristine days ago, was already chipped and filthy. "Sir, are you not to direct my fire?" asked Patinallo, his voice barely audible in Bannock's headphones. Bannock clawed his mask off, gasped as he took in the clearer air of the tank. "Too much incoming fire. Storms abated, so I'll risk the periscope," he said into the horn. "Though there is not a chance you will miss. Enemy line impact in 6 minutes. Maliant's voice, strong for a moment in the lull in the storm. Your coming actions honor the dead. Prepare to scour this world free of the Emperor's foe." Patinallo looked to Bannock, his eyes expectant over the rim of his rebreather mask. The face of Brevant bobbed about below him. Bannock nodded at them. What he'd seen had barely shaken his battle lust. This was what he had come for. This was what he had spent 2 years on a barge traveling over a segmentum to do, a chance at redemption. Excitement coursed through his veins, and indomitable fury surged beneath him. A 60-ton monster capable of spitting death over a kilometer, and 2 more like it, were his to command. He felt invincible, as safe behind the tank's armor as if he were enfolded in the wings of the Emperor. He threw a lever, pulling back the metal eyelid covering the tank's periscope. He put his face to the rubber seal over the eyepiece. The orc horde swam into view, magnified by the scope, a wall of savage green monsters with teeth like bayonets. They were working themselves into a frenzy, discharging their weapons into the air. Suddenly, a large part of the line bellied back and then forwards, a gathering of strength and hate. Orc leaders, taller by a head than their comrades and sporting trophy poles on their backs, ran among them, shouting and striking at the smaller greenskins. But they could not restrain them. The line broke. The orcs were as indisciplined as he'd heard. Captain Malian spoke. "The Empe, OWS the way. Readjust course, aim for the weakening of the line. Enemy in range. Open fire, 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 fire." Muffled reports came through the hull of Indomitable Fury, the other Russ's commanders jockeying to see who would be first to kill. Not Bannock. He would select his target with care. His first kill would be a big one. He wanted to make certain of it. He scanned the orc line. "Gunner Patinallo," he shouted. "Load armor-piercing high-density shell." "Sir, armor-piercing high-density shell," said Patinallo. The Lemon Rus was noisy, engine, storm and battle noise conspiring to drown out a commander's orders. All conversation was conducted at a shout over the tank intercom. Repetition was essential. Brevant hauled out a green-tipped shell from the rack and slammed it home. Track turret, 32 degrees left. Turret 32 degrees left, repeated the gunner. Beyond him the loader had already produced a second shell, preparing to ram it into the breach as soon as the first had been fired. Servos whined as the turret turned. Elevate 5 degrees. Bannock had his eye on a hulking wagon crammed with orcs. Several of these had rumbled forwards in the wake of the infantry hammering across the sands towards the tanks, and were beginning to outpace them. The body of the gun within the tank's turret shifted, halting with a clank. Patinallo consulted his ranging scope. That big orc tank, Lieutenant. The very one. Fire. Patinallo sat back and his loader rotated aside as he depressed the firing lever. The tank shuddered as Indomitable Fury replied to the orcish guns. The noise inside was deafening. The barrel recoiled backwards a third of a meter, fiercely enough to kill anyone stood behind it. The breech door flicked open, ejecting the shell casing halfway and filling the compartment with acrid smoke. Brevant reached his thick gloves between the gunner's and commander's seats to haul the empty casing loose, hurling it back to the tank floor. Bannock remained glued to his periscope. Bright fire erupted along the length of the orc tank as the shell hit home, pride burning in his heart with it. Armor plates lifted as if punched from within by a giant. Orc body parts pinwheeled away. Black debris patted down on the sand. When the last had rained down, the tank sat billowing a streamer of greasy black smoke into the wind. Hit confirmed. Well done, Gunner Patinallo, our first kill of the day, their first kill ever. He curbed an urge to shout like the savage Xenos outside. Armor-piercing round, he ordered. Patinallo echoed him. Brevant brought up the second shell, slid it into the barrel and shut the breech while Patinallo and Bannock drew a bead on the selected target. Indomitable Fury once more gave its deadly shout. A clanking orc walker shattered into fragments, cutting down the infantry about it with red-hot shrapnel. Then the Vox blared with static, and the scene was washed away once again by a renewed blizzard of sand. The orc line had vanished, those reckless few who had broken forwards mere shadows in the storm. Damn, swore Bannock. High X, we'll fire blind into the main body. Thin their numbers, shouted Bannock. His crew dutifully echoed him. Creeper, for, Court Maliant's voice began to break up. The end of his statement was lost to the bark of Fury's main gun firing for a third time. When Bannock's ears stopped ringing, there was nothing but interference on the external Vox. We've lost contact with the captain again. The storm's picking up, visibility's back down to 30 meters, said Bannock. Sponson gunners, keep your eyes peeled for anti-tank. We'll get no infantry support until the grunts debark. Stay on guard. Enemy line 200 meters and closing, called out Kurlik. The 4 Lemon Rus echelons of the twin Imperial spearheads smashed into the charging vanguard of the orc line within seconds of each other. The Xenos ran screaming at the tanks, trying to grab on. Many were pulled over, sent head over heels into the dust, more falling under churning tracks. Sponson gunners opened fire, bellowed Bannock. Adrenaline coursed through him as the rapid crackle of multiple bolt ignitions joined the racket in the tank. The other vehicles in the formation followed suit, heavy bolters raking the desert. Orcs exploded in fountains of gore. Still they came on. Kurlik shouted, wait, look. Out there, to the left. Contact, enemy inbound. Bannock swung the periscope round, twisting handles to transform a blur of motion into a picture he could understand. Out to their flank a score of orcs were emerging from the sandstorm, followed by more, and then more. They flung back trapdoors and blankets, pulling themselves out of the desert. Many of them clutched crude rockets on poles and limpet mines the size of turret hatches. By the throne. Ambush. Anti-tank, anti-tank. Left Sponson concentrate on the missile launchers. Now, do it now, shouted Bannock. Rockets corkscrewed through the air on black smoke trails. There was a ringing bang on the hull. Bannock winced, but there was no explosion. Others were not so lucky. 3 found their mark on Azorian endures fatefully, Bannock's number 2, directly in front of Indomitable Fury. It lifted off the sand as its magazine detonated, turning over and over in the air with unlikely grace. Bannock stared numbly as it began its downward trajectory, sure it would hit them, then Indomitable Fury spun to the side in a grind of protesting gears. The wrecked tank slammed into the ground meters from them. Bannock was thrown out of his seat, and thanked the Emperor for Kurlik's skill as they skidded round the twisted wreck. Bannock regained his scope to see orcs pouring towards them, more and more appearing out of the sandstorm and weaving their way into the formation. Sergeant Galliant, concentrate fire to the left, protect the flank, don't let them through. My, N form, main, Maliant said over the vox. Screams competed with frantic orders and roaring static as crews were cooked alive inside their armor. They're breaking the formation, shouted Bannock. This was not how orcs were supposed to behave. They were supposed to be indisciplined, chaotic. This was a coordinated attack. What he'd taken for impatience was anything but. As circumscribed as his view of the field was, it was obvious to Bannock that this was not indiscipline. It was an ambush. Sponson guns tracked uselessly over the orcs' heads as they came in close and low. Rockets rained down from the sides of the formation. As they drew near the tanks, the green Xenos flung their limpet mines. They stuck with loud clangs to 2 more tanks ahead of Indomitable Fury. The bombs exploded. One tank came through a wreath of fire, guns blazing, the other did not. Another lemon rust gone. There's one on the hull. There's one on the hull, yelled Kurlik. The clank of heavy boots ran up the front of Indomitable Fury. Bannock reacted fast, threw open the hatch, hand pulling his rebreather over his mouth. He rose into the teeth of Fury itself. His nose clogged and sand rasped in his throat and lungs before the mask snapped into place. An orc, taller than the tallest man Bannock had ever seen and as heavily muscled as Paragonian swamp cattle, towered above him. Its raised hands held higher metal poles so heavy that Bannock could never have lifted it. Atop the pole a fat, checkered rocket had been wired in place like a hammerhead. Bannock grabbed for the storm bolter atop the pintle mount. His hands found the cold metal grips, gritty with sand, and he swung it round. The world contracted to a point immediately in front of him, orc and gun, life and death. The storm and the battle were wiped from his perception, his sense of time slowed to a crawl. He pulled the trigger of the storm bolter, watching detachedly as the bolts came out of the weapon's twin barrels, tiny jets igniting at the tail of each as they exited, to accelerate them away. 1, 2, 3. All missed. The orc's rocket came down, inevitable. The 4th bolt caught the orc in the leg. Mass-activated sensors detonated the miniature missile's charge at a predetermined depth within its warty flesh, blowing the limb free in a spray of blood and meat. The orc went down face first, its rocket clattering harmlessly away. The creature bellowed as it tumbled off Fury's hull, its shout cut short as it went under the treads. Bannock tracked his bolt around, shooting down orcs wherever he could. Don't let the greenskins through into the formation center, he ordered. Sir, something on the scope. Patinello's panicked voice was loud in his headphones. By the Emperor, sir. Sir, you better come and see this. Sir. Through veils of sand like grasping fingers Bannock saw them, orc super heavy walkers 14 meters tall, bristling with weapons, crushing orcs too slow to move out of the way. Like all the orcs' machines, they were crude and ugly, fashioned as caricatures of fat orc warriors, bulging bellies made of jagged metal plates hammered together with little care and painted in color schemes of glaring red and yellow, or in garish camo patterns. Crude, but deadly, and 7 of them were coming straight at the left echelon. The formation headed blindly towards them. Formation. Form. Alt. Came Malian's crackling voice. Formation. The captain's voice cut out as the orc walkers opened up, heavy ordnance toted on stumpy arms sending shells slamming into the center of the task force. Maliant, Captain Maliant, come in, shouted Bannock. Useless, Lieutenant Verlanek, he called out to the second in command. No reply there either. That left him in command of the depleted company. The echelon began to break up as the tank squadrons spun tracks, frantically trying to avoid the walkers. Battle cannons barked flame and smoke as turrets rotated, tracking the threat. Shells shattered with fiery bangs against the thick orc armor, but the walkers did not slow. All squadrons, Lieutenant Bannock, I am in command. Full reverse, shouted Bannock. Form up on me, single line, bring fire to bear. He consulted his TAC display, picking out the walker with what seemed the heaviest guns. .9050. Hearing his voice, the company began to exhibit some degree of order, forming a wall. They were down to 6 tanks. Bannock narrowed his eyes. The second company appeared to be doing the same, tanks inching backwards, loosing shots as they went. He shouted into the horn, internal vox. Patinello, aim for the... He never finished his order. A 3-barreled cannon on a bright yellow walker flashed fire. A second later Bannock's universe became featureless white, shuddering with noise. He felt himself fall, then felt nothing. Orcs are orcs are orcs, and we're the best in the galaxy. But us, we're the best yet, better than the best of the best. We're blood axes, gawkier than Gorg, and morkier than everyone. We are strong, and we are smart. We're going to tear you all apart, snick snick. Better than a Goth, and sneakier than a Death Skull. We're strong and deadly, but we are cunning too. Translated message from Arch Scarlord. General Gratstacker were Mekdaka, prior to the Kaladar invasion. Chapter 3. WARPSPACE 9,189,267, M41, nominal. The feeling in the ship was electric, full of foreboding. Their 2-year voyage to Kaladar was nearly done, and the dreams were getting worse. Bannock had not slept properly for days. Lieutenant Callaghan's hand descending on his shoulder was an unwelcome shock. "I thought I'd find you in here," said Callaghan, peering into the gloom of Chapel 42, the largest ecclesiastical chamber on the transport barge. A statue of the Emperor in armor, 3 times the height of a man, stared down upon the ranks of pews, flanked by smaller sculptures of saints of the Guard and the Navy. The chapel was getting fuller by the day the nearer the translation came, and now choirs of priests sang constantly, imploring the Emperor for safe passage through the warp. "Keep your voice down," muttered Bannock. The transport barge's cannon walked by the end of the row of seats, gaze almost as stern as that of the Emperor's statue standing at the head of the chapel. "Can't a man pray in peace?" "You do altogether too much praying." Callaghan sat down on the pew by which Bannock knelt. He at least had the decency to drop his voice and mark the sign of the Aquila, Paragonian style, across his forehead. "I remember a time when you didn't use to pray at all." "Times change. Men change." "Maybe," Callaghan nodded. "Then, come on, I've got something to show you." "Leave me be. You'll like it, I promise." "I'm not done." Callaghan's face lost its perpetual grin for a moment. "Yes you are, praying won't change anything, collar on." "I don't see it that way." Callaghan scratched his head. "What's done is done. Heroes of the Imperium, the time for words is done. Time to live by your actions." Callaghan mimicked the thick accent of their commanding officer, Colonel Shalana, a non-Paragonian, like most of the higher-ups in the new regiment. "You don't know anything about it," said Bannock. "I know that you were an idiot to sign up. You could have stayed at home and got rich and fat, not be scurrying around in the depths of this tomb with Emperor knows what scrabbling around outside to get in at us." Callaghan shuddered. "Gives me the fear. Now, as far as I know you're free right now." Callaghan stood and bowed to the master of mankind. "I have some orders to deliver to the vehicle deck, and you will want to see what's waiting where I'm going, trust me, but it's a bit of a walk." "Time to commencement of real space translation ritual, 6,000 cycles," intoned a voice, booming across the transport barge in mechanical high Gothic, the syntax mangled in the Navy way, unfamiliar words peppered throughout. "All personnel prepare for translation. Naval personnel note, Captain Almazan commands free time reduction from 30 to 10 minutes daily. Rapid translation preparation protocols Alpha 10 are now in place. Only the fool shirks his duty, for the Emperor knows all." A metallic hiss ended the announcement. "What is that, 5 days?" muttered Callaghan, his face made choleric by the red lighting of the corridor. "You're hopeless. 2 days, 4.5 hours, give or take a few minutes. Come on, play fair call. I've never heard the 1,000-cycle system used outside the Bazdak bureaucracy. That and Zero Night, and we." Oh, he winced when he realized he might have put his foot in it. But Bannock did not react. "My clan, your adopted family, for the love of the saints, use it in our manufactoria," Bannock said. "It keeps the Bazdak bureaucracy happy. If you'd have spent more time learning the ways of your own family and less time drinking and chasing skirt, you mightn't find it so confusing." Callaghan reached a bulkhead door, grasped the wheel in the center and turned to his friend. "Why bother? I was always going into the army, me." He spun the door lock with one hand. "I had a nice, cushy little job in the planetary militia lined up. No war on Paragon for 1,000 years, should have been a breeze, just my blasted luck they called a regimental draft 2 weeks after I signed up. After you, sir." Callaghan executed a mock bow. "Stop it, Laszlo, we'll be up on charges if we get seen. You're a lieutenant too." "Yep, well, you have the greater air of authority. All I do is mope about all the parties I'm missing, hardly the stuff of command, am I?" He held up the flimsy clutched in his hand. "Now whereby the High Lords of Terra's collective backsides is Berth 29, Omicron, E94A. They could have given me an Auspex map. I can barely see this thing, it's so dark down here." None of the lights are working. Typical. They could have given you a pass for the tubeway too, but they didn't. Why did I agree to come with you? I could have got some sleep. We both know why you didn't do that, muttered Callaghan, scanning the map hopelessly. The nightmares. It's because we're nearly out, it's the worst time. Bannock snatched at the map. Give it here. Look, the vehicle decks are this way. He traced his finger round a tangle of corridors. But we'll have to avoid this next section. He pointed down the corridor to the next bulkhead. It's not in use. Callaghan rolled his eyes. You mean go back? I swear this ship has more holes in it than the Emperor himself. Bannock gave his friend a level stare. They're going to shoot you one day, you know that. The route to 29, Omicron E94A proved long and convoluted. Several times they had to turn around, their way blocked by bulkhead doors welded shut. More sections of the millennia-old craft unused and uninhabitable. They walked kilometers of corridor in the skin of the hull, passing rarely into the vast open spaces at the heart of the barge. Once they walked a catwalk 100 meters above the training field, 1,000 meters square of bare metal deck where they'd spent much of the last 2 years training on mock battlefields. More corridors, on and on past dim rooms where bunks stretched off into the gloom. The thrum of the engines grew louder until conversation grew impossible between them, then receded. They passed through a gallery where hundreds of naval personnel toiled at an incomprehensible machine of obscure purpose and immense size, its throaty roar accompanied by the crack of whips and the dirge of a warp shanty. After 3 hours they found themselves walking through colonnaded cloisters running the length of the barge's vehicle decks. Hundreds of Lemon Russ tanks, Chimera armored personnel carriers, Salamander scout vehicles, self-propelled artillery, support vehicles and other, more unusual types rested in their transport cradles, stacked like models in a god's toy shop, the racks disappearing into the gloom. Aside from a few servitors patrolling the place, they were alone. Munitorum and Adeptus Mechanicus personnel would have locked down the place as soon as the 12-cycle translation warning had come. Having seen to their charges, they'd be preparing themselves now. A weird howling filled the air and the hairs on Bannock's neck stood on end. The entire craft shuddered. What the? Callaghan put his hand on Bannock's shoulder. Don't worry. It's always this way when they're getting ready to translate, said Callaghan, low and conspiratorial. That's when it happens. Coming in or going out of the immaterium, that's when the Geller fields are most stressed. He laughed at his friend's dismay. Don't worry. It doesn't happen often. The stress sets up all kinds of weird harmonics in the hull, especially in an old tub like this. How do you know that? Bannock swallowed nervously. A quartet of servitors clanked towards them. They had to move aside or be crushed. Once they had passed, the 2 lieutenants continued onwards. I did pay some attention to my own clan's business. My cousins told me. Just how many cousins do you have? Callaghan's cousins were an endless source of information. A couple of dozen. If there weren't so many I'd never have been sent to live with you, would I? 4 of them are merchantmen, you know that. Typical, I'm the one that really didn't want to go into space, and yet here I am. Stop complaining, it's not worthy of our kind. We're here and, are those that Bannock stopped, awestruck. Well, would you look at that, said Callaghan with mock surprise. See, I told you I had something worth showing you, eh? In the racks before them squatted the Titanic vehicles of the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company. There were 4 of them, only 4 vehicles to make up an entire company. Bannock could not imagine what an entire regiment of them would be like, not that such things existed. Aside from the Task Force Command Leviathan, the Super Heavies were the only tanks of that size and power on the entire transport barge. They were rare. Bannock looked at the tanks with awe and respect, 2 versatile Baneblades, a short-range engagement Hellhammer, and a Shadow Sword armed with an anti-Titan volcano cannon. Are you glad you came now? Said Callaghan. Keeping me company for a while a fair trade. Imagine serving on him, Laszlo, imagine commanding one. Callaghan shook his head. Me, I'd rather serve on that. He pointed down the ranks of tank cradles. The lower half of one side of the Leviathan could just be made out in the distance, heavy with decoration, 3 great turrets atop bastions along its flank, a cathedral on tracks. On the Leviathan, no Laszlo, they never see much action, too important. These super heavy tanks, that's what does all the fighting. My point exactly, said Callaghan. Stop that will you, 2 more minutes and you'll be dribbling. Aye. Callaghan was interrupted. A servitor with a socket in place of a left arm came to life in the shadows, causing them both to start, and marched stiffly across the deck. A faded penal tattoo adorned its bald head. Whoever had provided its organic component had been a giant in life. A harsh machine voice barked out of a speaker in its neck, the lips remaining immobile. Half its face was given over to an implanted targeting array, its remaining human eye blank and fixed on the air above their heads. State your business. This is a restricted area. No admission to the vehicle decks during transit period for non-authorized personnel. We have authorization. I am delivering this data capsule on behalf of General Ban Lo Verkrigan, said Callaghan. A spread of green light emanated from the cyborg's facial implants, sweeping back and forth over the capsule in Callaghan's hand. Authorization code accepted. It turned abruptly. Follow me. You stay here, I have to go in there, said Callaghan, pointing at a door in the stanchions of the racks. Deliver this to some agency or other. Are you listening to me? What? Yes, sorry. Callaghan followed Bannock's eyeline to the massive hull of a Baneblade. Oh, you are smitten, aren't you? Makes you proud to serve the Emperor, eh? Callaghan huffed when Bannock paid no attention to his sarcasm, and followed the servitor through a door, leaving Bannock alone. A clatter from one of the barge's workshops sounded far in the distance, otherwise the vehicle deck was empty of noise beyond the omnipresent hum of the ship's engines. Bannock had become so accustomed to their constant vibration over the long voyage that it had come to feel a part of him. He walked over to the Baneblade. His regiment had performed battle drills in their Lemon Russes, preparing for the day when they might have to support such an engine in combat, but the super heavies themselves were far too valuable to risk in training exercises. He couldn't imagine what could possibly harm it. It was even more impressive than he had imagined. Clamps held the massive machine in place, tracks raised a few centimeters off the floor, hundreds of tons of plasteel floating in the air, enwrapped in thick cables. Parchment scripts were affixed to the hull in clusters by seals of deep red wax, bearing prayers of safe transit in High Gothic and Binaric, evidence of the creed of the tech adepts who shepherded such beasts to war. He ducked down and leaned his head in close, looking down the line of the tank under the sponsons to the rear. It was bigger than most family habitation units. He reached out a hand. The hull was tacky, the jagged stripes of red and grey-blue camouflage that would hide it in the storms of Caladar recently applied. Its name, Mars Triumphant, was engraved on a plasteel scroll at the fore of the vehicle's track guards. He breathed out steadily. Here was a machine of heroes. He could only dream of commanding such a tank. Such an honor was reserved for those tank commanders who had proven themselves in battle time and again. A few alone were offered the opportunity to become honored lieutenants, in command of a super heavy. To captain a Baneblade, one of the Emperor's hammers, 9 men looking to him to lead them. He shook his head. He was not worthy, he never would be. He'd seen to that himself. Perhaps it was his imagination, but the tank seemed to rumble slightly, as if it growled in its sleep. He took his hand away. Hey! Bannock jumped to his feet. What are you doing skulking about down there? Worshipping it now, are you, like one of those tech adepts? I'd have thought even you would have had enough of prayers today. Callaghan came over and cuffed his shoulder. Let's get out of here. You've had your treat. Whatever was in those orders can't have been good. That engineer did not look happy. I don't want to hang around in case he decides to respond in kind. Last thing I want to do is rush about this hulk all day. Come on, I need a drink. No, I need to get drunk, and it's a long walk back. Caladar is not a pleasant place to be. It's a desert, not enough moisture to make a cup of caffeine in 400 cubic kilometers of atmosphere. The star's a nightmare, pumps out solar flares of such magnitude the planet's magnetosphere is constantly in turmoil. Vox communications nigh on impossible because of that. Comsats get fried in orbit. Anything other than a shout won't get through, short-range Vox is unreliable, long-range unlikely, and heavy data transmission impossible without direct line of sight. The radiation from the sun would kill you all, in fact, if it weren't for the dust in the air, and that brings me on to the next set of happy facts, gentlemen, the weather. The temperature can swing from iron-cracking cold to 80 degrees plus within a couple of hours. The wind's constant and high, and wind shear is so dangerous you can forget air support. Oh wait my brave boys. It gets worse. That dust might keep the sun from filling your bones with cancer, but it gets everywhere, and is sharp as ground glass. Go out without your goggles and go blind. Go out without your rebreather and you can kiss goodbye to the galaxy, because you'll be choking on pieces of your own lungs before the week's out. They got a name for it, dust lung. And unless you fancy getting on personal terms with it, you'll check and recheck your rebreathing unit every 4th hour, every Emperor blessed day until you're sick of the sight of it. This is your main piece of equipment, not your lasgun, not your helmet, this. Look after it, or die. Simple as that. Training Senior Sergeant Vasco Van Hall. 492nd Cadian Shock Troops, attached to the 63rd Paragonian Mechanized Infantry. Chapter 4. KALIDARIV, KOSTOVAL Flats 3,267,397, M41. Lock that fire down, shouted Courtine. He wiped sweat from his face, his eyes stinging with the smoke wafting up from below. And shut those damn alarms off. Status report, Eperalient. Second Lieutenant Commsman Eperalient ran his eyes over the tech feed on his desk, Tech Adept Vorkoxygen being below tackling the damage. We're still functional, engine online and all weapons operational. Damage is minor. Good, said Courtine and switched frequency, directing his voice through the company's closed datanet. Honored Lieutenant Martican, concentrate all fire on that lead walker. Affirmative. It was Kolkin, the commsman on Artemon Ultras speaking, voice stuttering and cracked by the Vox problems. We'll follow your lead. Damn right, muttered Courtine to himself. I've been doing this a lot longer than Martican. Then, louder into the external Vox, piping targeting data over. Mars Triumphant's main armament hurled a rocket-propelled shell at a super-heavy Orc walker. The munition exploded in a ball of red-hot metal and billows of fire, shaking the war machine as it scythed an enormous chain weapon towards a pair of Lemon Russ tanks. A second shell impacted, fired by Artemon Ultras, Mars Triumphant's sister Baneblade in the company. The grind of shearing metal was audible even through the Baneblade's hull as the walker's arm fell off the machine. An explosion battered against Mars Triumphant's armor. Alarms wailed louder, more smoke filtered up into the command deck from the gangway below. I said get that alarm shut off and put that damn fire out. Marcelo, Megan, help him. Third loader Marcelo, the youngest crew member, nodded and got up from his station, making for the narrow stairs heading below, first loader Megan hurrying from his station by the top of the shell lift in the turret. Courtine coughed and wiped at his streaming eyes. His men were taking too long, the fire had been burning for well over a minute. The Baneblade rocked as another huge impact slammed into its heavily armored hull. Loaders Marcelo and Megan were now at the side of Tech Adept Aspirant Vorkoxygen, wrestling with extinguishers, directing noisy jets of fire-suppressant gases at the flames. Courtine urged him to greater effort. With two of the loaders on fire control, half the tank's tertiary weapons were inactive, third gunner Van struggling at the station behind Courtine to work both sponson banks and the forward bolter turret without the help of his loader Marcelo. What's the damage? Asked Courtine. It's the rear left side augers, sir. Feedback. They've shorted out, Commsman Eperalient replied. He punched a button and the alarm klaxon died. Again, what's the situation outside? The echelons on Formation Alpha have driven deep into the Orcs, the Atraxian 18th are following them in, they're crushing everything in their path, said Eperalient, hunched over his comms suite, face lit a sickly yellow by the glow of its screens. But Beta is stalling. The Greenskins must have known when and where we were coming, their whole strength is concentrated here. He flashed up a TAC map onto Courtine's chart desk. Blinking lights pinpointed the main Orc force. 500 meters or so out from their trench line, Orc anti-tank dug in the desert. We drove right over them. The third company has taken a pounding. Half of it's gone, as far as I can see. The second isn't faring much better. I count over a half dozen super heavy walkers out there, and they're chewing the Lemon Russ tanks to pieces. The 4th and 5th companies and the 18th Atraxian super heavies are faring better, but only because all the walkers are down our end of the line. Alpha's infantry support is holding its own, advancing as per the plan, but if we don't put a lid on the situation here, the Greenskins will roll up our entire front. Our infantry. Half of it's been cooked in the can. General order is out for main elements of the 63rd Paragonian Mechanized and 13th Light Savler to fall back. Artillery bombardment is underway as planned, but my guess is they're shelling empty sand. All the Orcs are here. He tapped at a screen, his fingernail clicking on it in a way that cut through the noise inside the tank. Eperalient shot his commanding officer a worried look. 7 heavy walkers. Where by the Golden Throne did they come from? They've been holding him back, that's obvious, said Courtine. Those thrice-damned Kreebirds up at HQ don't know the Orc. This whole affair has stunk of a trap since the outset. Courtine jammed his finger onto a Vox button, connecting him to Outlander, the driver to the fore of the deck below, Ganlik at the demolisher cannon, the second gunner's station, Radon the first gunner in the turret, all compartments. He spoke rapidly, surely. Keep us moving forwards, Ganlik, lay down a Sigma pattern, suppressive fire, keep those green scum away from my tank. He beckoned to the commsman. Eperalient, help Vand, do what you can with the heavy bolters while the loaders are busy. Corteen scanned over his command suite. Orders from Hannock, the companies to cover the retreat of the infantry units. Let's show these orc monstrosities what a full company of the Emperor's finest can do. Sir. Eperalient rerouted the main Vox from his headphones over the command deck. A barrage of Vox chatter swamped the cramped room, screams, weapons fire, voices hoarse with shouted orders, all battling with Kaladar's ever-present roar. He slid his chair along its rails so he could get out, stumbling as the tank took a hit, then joined Vand at the tertiary weapons system fire control, remotely controlling the bolters and lascannon of the left sponson bank, targets displayed on the screens at the station, relayed by the auger eyes of the weapons. The muffled report of the hull demolisher cannon joined the faint chatter of the bolters as Ganlik, Eperalient and third gunner Van set to work, clearing the field in front of the super heavy tank. Now for the battle cannon. Radon was doing his best, but he'd do better if Corteen directed him. Radon, follow my mark. Cortein's fingers moved confidently over the screens of his command suite, bringing up a weak point on the one-armed walker, a pot-bellied mechanical parody of an orc painted in a camouflage of bright blues. Even bereft of its melee arm, it still bristled with ranged weapons as long as a lemon russ. The target's information was conveyed by Martian means to the suite in front of Radon's chair up above and out to the company's other Baneblade. Hearing you loud and clear, sir, said Radon over the internal Vox. Tracer fire from the battle cannon's coaxially mounted autocannon tracked across the chest of the Orc war machine, ranging the shot. Give me a moment and, Mars Triumphant's main gun spoke and Radon whooped like a simian. The tank shuddered. Cortein's screens whited out as Lux Imperator, the company shadow sword operating to their right, fired its volcano cannon into the heavy walker squadron. Corteen expected the orcs to be one walker down after that. Two Baneblades could take down a super heavy walker in fairly short order if well coordinated. A shadow sword's anti-Titan main armament needed no help. It was a damned shame its capacitors were so slow to recharge after firing. Was it a hit? Confirm Radon, confirm. Corteen cursed tech adept Vorkossigen under his breath. He'd said he'd applied the necessary libations to ensure the smooth working of the anti-glare cutouts when what he needed, Corteen suspected, was to try a little harder with his tools. Obviously didn't pray hard enough, he growled. Rattles and banging came from below, second loader Ralt working hard alone, shuttling shells from the magazine to replenish the racks by the forward demolisher cannon. I'm not getting anything, sir. Wait. A hit, yes, hang on. Bazdak, negative, no kill. The grainy images of the world outside returned to the tank's screens. The heavy walker hit by Lux Imperator was a blazing hulk, molten steel dripping from a large round hole in its hull, but the engine Mars Triumphant had targeted was still standing, wobbling slowly round, fire gouting from a hole in its breast, its head grinding to face them. A shell from Artemon Ultras blasted into it, bringing away a section of gantry. It's still coming, said Corteen. Keep at it, we've got its attention, finish it off, quickly, before it returns fire. Sir. The Gatling cannon on the giant metal orc's left arm began to rotate, picking up speed until it was a blur of motion. A hail of shell fire patted off the hull of the Baneblade, damaging subsystems, auger eyes among them. Two of Cortein's screens went dead. The battle cannon fired again. The damaged plates in the heavy walker's chest crumpled in. It swayed on its feet, Gatling cannon firing wild. Rockets burned off a rack set upon the right shoulder, trailing bright fire. They impacted in a wide burst pattern about the Baneblade, one slamming home on the front of the tank, wreathing Cortein's visual displays in flame. Radon, said Corteen, put that walker down now. I hit it, protested the gunner. Two more impacts shuddered into the walker's armor, buckling plates, one each from Artemon Ultras's demolisher and battle cannon. Still it came on. The walker stopped. A huge cannon on its shoulder above the ruined left arm began to track down. Too late, said Corteen. Brace. A flash of light showed up the ragged joins in the walker's armor. Slowly, the walker leaned drunkenly over to one side, staggering on its massive armored feet, and toppled to the desert floor. Secondary explosions ripped through its structure, breaking its back, and the walker's hull sank into itself. Corteen breathed a sigh of relief and a ragged cheer went up from the other 9 men on the tank. Woo, that was my shot. That was my kill. Cut the fuse a little long on that one. Ha ha, laughed Radin. Right in the guts. How do you like that, you fat Bazdak? Fires out, sir, called Megan. Back to your stations, ordered Corteen. Sponson and secondary weapons intensify forward fire. Corteen quickly appraised the situation. The remaining 4 walkers were off to the right. Let the Shadow Sword deal with them. Infantry was their problem right now. Radin, permission to engage targets of opportunity. Keep the field round Lux Imperator clear. Let it work unmolested. You're a gentleman, sir, crackled the Vox. Corteen scanned the bank of brass-bound monitors before him, his view of the battle a fragmented 360-degree panorama. TAC screens fed in data from the other 3 vehicles in the company. The technology in the Baneblade was first-rate, Martian secrets far superior to the systems of the Lemon Russes on the field about them. But even delivered via the 7TH's networked logic engines, the data was scrambled by Kaladar, full of junk, and jutted across screens alive with electric snow. A wide chart desk projecting a 3-dimensional representation of the conflict occupied the center of his station. There, the Alpha formation showed as red Imperial signifiers buried deep in dots of swirling green. The right side of the battlefield was not so healthy. Beta formation's attack had been blunted by the Orc ambush and the walkers. Red chevrons, the armored fist units of the infantry, were falling back in orderly fashion, regrouping behind the super heavy tank company to shelter from the walkers' fire. With the TAC screens and the periscope feeds ranged about his command deck, Corteen's view of the battle was broad, the height of the Baneblade allowing him to look down on the fighting orcs and men as if they were brawling men and children. Others might find it a godlike position, but not Corteen. Hubris was a fatal trait in an honored lieutenant. To command a super heavy tank was to command a target, the storm of incoming fire rattling off the hull of Mars Triumphant proving the point. According to the TAC screens, the super heavy tanks were making their mark. The Walker unit had lost 3 of its number to the volcano cannon of Lux Imperator and the combined fire of the 2 company Baneblades, Company Commander Hanix Hellhammer Ostrakan's rebirth taking a heavy toll of the greenskin infantry and their smaller machines. Although the beta assault had been stymied, now it was the turn of the Orcs to fall back. The heavy walkers were waddling backwards from the 7th, giving the remaining Lemon Russ squadrons in the 2nd and 3rd companies some respite. These had formed into a wall and begun to reverse, but now they halted to better direct their fire. Out to the left, the Orc line had bowed considerably under pressure from the super heavies of Atraxia. There, lines of Paragonian infantry marched in gaps between the advancing Imperial tanks, supported by armored troop carriers moving up behind them, as per the plan. Bright trails of vaporized sand twisted into the wind of the storm as multi-laser beams stabbed out, the barrels of the guns running hot. Thin lines of lighter armed Savla toxic environment specialists ranged to the flanks, hunting stragglers. Many Orc vehicles had been destroyed, undone by superior Imperial firepower. The Orc mobs came running in again and again, but were cut down before they were able to close for melee, where they would undoubtedly have triumphed over the weaker humans. Still, Corteen did not think the battle won. His eyes were caught by the forward left auger screen. A huge shape appeared then vanished in the swirling sand, lost behind the storm-shrouded silhouettes of the remaining 4 walkers. Eperalient, Sector 5, what by the Holy Throne is that? I'm not getting anything. Wait, new hostile approaching, designation unknown. Threat indicators are going wild, honored lieutenant. A hulking shape pushed its way through the Orc heavy walkers, clanging into them as it barged them out of the way. It emerged from the dust storm, gut thrust forwards. Like the heavy walkers, it was round-bellied, supported on enormous feet, its stumpy arms a mess of enormous, ramshackle weapons, and thick plates of armor decorated with daubed ideograms protecting its clunking inner workings. The similarities ended there. It was far larger, Titan class at least, an Orc Gargant, size matched only by the sense of malevolence preceding it. 2 globes on ridged conducting rods projected high over its back, and weird energies played about the thing's grotesque faceplate, darting lightning up to the globes above its horned head, and arcing down in a broad umbrella all about it. Its eyes glowed bright. Corteen felt an uncomfortable sensation at the back of his skull, his teeth itched, and the air took on the taste of aluminium. Emperor's throne, he breathed. He knew the feeling, not felt for a long time, the sensation that came from the presence of a powerful witch. The Orc Titan was carrying a Psyker. Honored Captain Hannick, commanding officer of the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company and Formation CIC, shouted out over the Vox, his powerful override shutting out all other communications and momentarily subduing the planet's incessant roar of electrostatic. All tanks, target heavy engine sector 5. The Gargant's outline flashed up in white on Cortine's crackling screens. Tactical info scrolled urgently over it. Destroy it. The thing's mouth slowly opened, a barbed cannon extruding from its distended jaws. Cannon and lasfire went flying in at the Gargant from all directions, the remaining Lemon Russ tanks and the Super Heavy Company all targeting together. Little got through to the Orc Titan's bulging hull. Explosions erupted all around the Gargant as shells detonated, lascannon blasts and plasma shots smeared themselves to nothing well away from its armor, dissipated by its shield of green lightning. The screens on Mars Triumphant whited out again as Lux Imperator's volcano cannon discharged once more, terawatts of energy unleashed in one blast. Mars Triumphant's screens cleared for Cortine to see Lux Imperator's beams stopped and spread like molten glass across the energy fields protecting the Titan. Cortine felt blood trickle from his nose. The Gargant's tongue punched forwards, vomiting a braided spout of green lightning. The stream of energy ran across the floor of the Dead Sea, tearing it up, a spume of earth following in its wake, cutting through Lemon Russes and Chimeras as if they weren't there, scattering men in pieces to Kaladar's endless winds. Sensors aboard the Baneblade spiked. Alarms wailed as the wave ran to their left, cleaving the ground perilously close to them. An explosion buffeted the Baneblade and the lights went out. Cortine reeled. Eperalient was thrown from his chair. The tank's ancient systems screeched and the hull groaned with stress. Lockers popped open and supplies tumbled to the floor, a Lascan power pack catching the commsman on the head. Cortine pulled himself up. Half the auger screens were dead. The fire klaxon sounded once more. Emergency lighting flickered on. Witch engine. It's a damned witch engine, shouted Cortine. In 30 years he'd only seen a machine of this type once before, an unholy mixture of technology and the arcane, wielding the powers of the immaterium to deadly effect. The Titan waddled forwards, trampling all before it, the more mundane cannons, rockets and energy weapons covering its arms and shoulders wreaking terrible destruction on the forces arrayed before it. Tanks exploded, men were rendered into scraps of flesh. What? Shouted Marcello, his face white with terror. He was barely a boy, a replacement for an old comrade lost to the Eldar back in the Indrani's campaign. There's a psyker on board that thing. Some kind of machine to intensify its warp energies, explained Eperalient. Sir, we don't have anything to go against that. We've no Scholastica Psychana support here. Hanik's voice came over the Vox. Tanks 2 and 3 to redirect fire against the heavy walkers. Protect Lux Imperator during recharge. Yes, sir, said Cortine. Martican, hear that? We won't get through that energy shield. Take out the Titan's support. Concentrate on the leftmost heavy walker. The red one, came back Kolkin. Aye, shouted Cortine. Outlander, get us in closer, I want Ganlik in range, let's make this quick. 4 heavy cannons, 2 apiece on the Baneblades, spoke in rapid succession and lines of lascannon fire seared the air. The heavy walker disappeared behind a wall of flame. When it reappeared, it came on only slowly, small fires burning all over it, right arm hanging uselessly by its side. Finish it, yelled Cortine. Artemon Ultras and Mars Triumphant obliged. Shells hammered into it. Internal explosions went off in a long string, fire spurting between joins in its armor. The super heavy walker stopped dead, smoking. Lux Imperator, main cannon charged, came the voice of the tank's honored lieutenant. Again the volcano cannon spat fire. Again it was stymied by the shields of psychic energy surrounding the enemy engine. The Gargant replied. Cortine's teeth itched as another wave of energy ripped across the desert, furrowing the sand and scorching it to glass. There came the noise of a massive explosion, and shrapnel dinging off Mars Triumphant's armor. Eperalient bent over the comms suite. Lux Imperator is hit, he said, blood running down his face from the cut in his scalp. On the screens of the command and comms suite, the great shell of the Shadow Sword burned. Bazdak, no, shouted Radon. Emperor's mercy, we'll never beat that, muttered Cortine, low so his men would not fear. Get on it, Captain Hanik on the Vox, now, shouted Cortine. Sir. Eperalient wiped blood from his eyes, trying to staunch the flow with his cap while he swept materiel off his comms desk. Hanik, came the CO's voice. Sir, shouted Cortine. His voice was becoming hoarse from making himself heard over the noise of the tank, the tumult of battle and Kaladar's roar. That's a damned witch engine the orcs have there. We have no Scholastica Psychana support, and there's no way the fleet can lend a hand through this storm. If we do not withdraw, it'll be a massacre. The Eludian campaign all over again. We have no way of bringing down a witch engine, not with Lux Imperator gone." Hanik's voice crackled, fading in and out with washes of static. "Once more you presume to tell me my job, Cortine, but I am inclined to agree with you. Task Force Beta to fall back by section. Paragonian 7th Super Heavy Company to cover retreat. Task Force Alpha, I advise you do the same. Once this witch engine is done with us, it'll be gunning for you. Thank the Emperor for this storm. If it hid the orcs, then by the throne it can hide us. Retreat, retreat. Order Epsilon 42. Fall back to rendezvous point 5. And Cortine. Sir. Nothing foolish. We cannot risk our main assets. Hanik out." Cortine reached for the talk button on his headset, to argue that he should stay and cover the guard as they fell back, then thought better of it. Hanik would not change his mind. The machines under his command were always his prime concern, not the men, who were far more numerous. "How many of our men are detailed to cover the retreat?" asked Cortine. 4 platoons of the 13th Savla, 5 of the 63rd Paragonian have been ordered forwards. They're taking heavy casualties, sir. Most of the 42nd Armored Regiment's gone, only 17 tanks operational across the whole front. The Atraxians are doing okay, but Grand Captain Olgau has confirmed that he has sounded a retreat in his quadrant also, said Eperaliant. Cortine clenched his jaw and worked his teeth together. He removed his Vox headset and turned round to face his men. "We're to fall back, but keep our face to the enemy. Head out reactor first. I won't have my tank showing its rear to the enemy when it can retreat with honor, spitting fire all the way. Where possible, I want supporting fire for the infantry covering our retreat." Eperaliant looked to his commander. "But our orders, sir," he said levelly. "Our orders are to not risk ourselves. Our armor is thicker to the front, is it not? And our guns face forwards, if I recall correctly." "Aye, sir." "Outlanner, reverse speed, all full." Cortine moved the heading and speed wheels at his station in time to his orders. A loud bell rang out to inform the driver, in case he did not catch the honored lieutenant's words. "Gunners, fire at will. Let's try and buy those poor Bazdaks out there some time." In times of war it is better to consider this, which is of more worth. A man who will serve the Emperor through his death, or a man who lives yet whose life may not serve at all. We face an eternity of war. Those who will not lay down their lives willingly are traitors to all mankind. Sayings of Warmaster Catherian. Chapter 5. KALIDARIV, KOSTOVAL flats 3,267,397, M41. Bannock should have been dead. The turret of Indomitable Fury lay canted on its back, Bannock underneath it. The Pintle storm bolter on the turret was jammed against the packed ground of the dry seafloor, preventing the lot from crushing him. It was the second time the weapon had saved him in an hour. He winced as he moved. He hurt all over, his chest bruised. He was sure he'd cracked a rib. Carefully, he pulled himself out from underneath and stood, body shaking. There'd been a hit on the tank. The turret must have been blown off. It was possible his men still lived. He staggered around in a half circle, searching for it. Wind-driven streamers of smoke and of dust shrouded the battlefield, then suddenly he saw it. Indomitable Fury's hull burned furnace hot, fanned by the wind. Fuel billowed in orange clouds of flame to mingle with the storm. Thick smoke poured out of the aperture where the turret had sat, the crackle of bolter shells cooking off joining with the noise of the larger battle. Bannock stared at the wreck of his first command numbly. No one could have survived that. His men were dead. He waited for the world to return to normal, for his ears to stop ringing and for his mind to come back into focus. He was not sure what to do. He turned. Behind him was a litter of dead orcs, blackened hulks of lemon russes and chimeras guttering fire, the sands about them stained with oil. Far to the rear, he could make out the dim shape of Keniston's tank, gun at maximum elevation, still hurling high X into the orcs. Beta formation had been broken, shattered by ambush and the arrival of the super heavy walkers. It looked like they'd forced a few hundred meters ahead of Bannock, but the formation remnants were drawing closer to him once again. Men and machines streamed towards and past him. Dimly, through the dust storm, he could make out a crescent line of a vanguard, tanks and infantry, holding the line while the Imperial Guard retreated. 4 lemon russes stood in line, all exhibiting some damage, starting backwards with each report of their battle cannon. Arrayed next to them was a line of 6 Chimera armored personnel carriers, their turrets tracking back and forth, multi-lasers blazing. In front of the vehicles, a triple line of mixed infantry, uniforms so thick with sand they were indistinguishable, firing by rank into the orcish horde ebbing and flowing towards them, each wave drawing a little nearer to the line. Off to the left he could see the looming shapes of the walkers, weapons fire lighting up the storm as they waddled away after something. He was relieved to see a couple of burning walker hulks nearby. Bannock groggily made his way forwards, only to realize that he was still tethered to the turret of Indomitable Fury by the pipes of his rebreather unit. The unit was fragged, and he realized that he'd been breathing the unfiltered storm air for the Emperor knew how long. He held his breath as he went back to the tank's severed head, dug into the sand a little so he could open the storage bins at the aft of the turret and, grimacing with pain, dragged out a portable rebreather and a las pistol. He tugged his mask off, and replaced it. Men ran past him as he walked forwards, many dragging wounded comrades, officers shouting Vox-amplified orders, trying to keep the withdrawal from degenerating into a rout. A panicked face loomed out of the storm, burned hands grasping at his uniform. "You're going the wrong way. You're going the wrong way. It's coming," the soldier yelled, then was gone. Armored vehicles roared past, turrets facing backwards, they spat fire behind him to cover their departure. The ground began to shake, the whistle of incoming shells and roar of Matacore rockets audible above the battle and the storm. An artillery bombardment had been called down. By the time he reached the line of men and vehicles, the Orc attack had paused, and the greenskins had disappeared into the shrouds of storm-blown dust, the giant walkers with them. The guardsmen stood nervously scanning the desert. Visibility was down to a score of meters at most. Bannock leaned into the wind as he walked the line, grasping dust-crusted shoulders and turning swaddled heads towards him, looking for signs of rank. Eventually, he found a man bearing the stripes of a Paragonian sergeant on his arm, a statue of sand with eyes of glass. "Where's your commanding officer?" he shouted. The Vox on his respirator was clogged with sand, the wind loud. He could barely hear his own voice. It was worse than it had been inside Indomitable Fury. The sergeant nodded to a mash of body parts crusted with dust. "All our senior officers are dead," said the sergeant. "I guess you're it now, Lieutenant." "What's the situation?" shouted Bannock. "The bombardment's keeping the greenies back." The sergeant pointed out past the line of intermingled orc and human dead, rapidly being covered by sand. "Our guns won't fire well. Damned dust refracts the beams before they get far. We're down to an effective range of 50 meters or less, but I think they've lost the guts for a scrap. If that green-eyed Bazdak comes back we're well and truly dead, though." "You refer to the walkers?" "No," the sergeant shook his head. "They were just a screen. The orcs had a damned titan in there. We didn't stand a chance." "What are your orders?" "Cover the retreat, fall back when orders come through, sir." His eyes were resigned behind the yellow plex of his goggles. The man did not expect to live the day out. "You getting any Vox coverage?" The sergeant shook his head. "How long since the last men came through?" asked Bannock. The sergeant shrugged like he'd already given up. 5 minutes. Bannock looked about. A pair of lemon rust tanks, one in bad shape, sponson missing and left side buckled, ground out of the sandstorm and passed by, its unharmed companion hurling shells blindly behind it. He waited. Nothing else came, neither friend nor foe. He grabbed the sergeant and shook him to gain his attention again. "Sergeant, I'll tell you what we are going to do. You and your men mount up, as many as possible aboard these transports." He indicated the chimeras behind the ranks of men, all the same camouflage, but emblazoned with a mix of Paragonian, Savlar and Atraxian regimental markings. "These tanks will cover your retreat. You are leaving in 10 minutes, all of you. That's an order, got that?" The sergeant nodded, hope in his eyes. Bannock went over to the first of the 4 tanks behind the infantry line. They were from a mix of squadrons, all 2nd Company. The tanks themselves were all just about combat-worthy, but the only lieutenant among them was dead, along with 5 other crew. Bannock ran up the side of the lead tank. Grim-faced men looked up to him. The dead lieutenant still sat in his chair, a crater in his chest and a look of surprise on his face. Bannock pointed to his insignia and took command without discussion. He heaved the dead 2nd Company officer's body out of his chair, pulling his tank rebreather and Vox set off and replacing his own rebreather with them. He sat down, and tried to ignore the feel of the blood seeping into his trousers. Wind whistled in through a hole in the turret, signs of the shellburst that had killed the lieutenant and turned the command suite into a shattered mess. The turret hatch was jammed open. Sand poured endlessly down into the interior. He stood and signaled the infantry sergeant, and the men quickly boarded their transports, those for whom room was lacking clambering on top. The Chimera's engines coughed into life. One by one, they spun round and vanished to the rear, swallowed by the storm. Designate Tank Squadron 111, Tanks Alpha through Delta, Bannock said, using the standard regimental term for a battlefield blending of units. "Aye, sir," replied the tank crews one after another. "Half-speed reverse. Gamma and Delta to cover left and right respectively. Load all weapons, high X. Wait for my order to fire," said Bannock. The tanks began to reverse at half speed, keeping their thicker armor towards the orcs. Nothing came from the sand. Bannock had his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Green sheet lightning flashed in the desert. Sir, to the left and rear," said his tank's gunner. The sandstorm was thicker than fog, and Bannock struggled to see. A further flash followed, then another. Shapes loomed in the dense caramel air, two massive orcoid silhouettes, one much larger than the other and spurting green fire and lightning. This must be the Titan the sergeant had referred to. By the Emperor, it was gargantuan. The heavy walker looked like a child at the skirts of its mother beside it. Bannock felt a tickling sensation behind his nose and tasted metal as the Titan cast green energy at the ground. His skin crawled. An umbrella of flickering power shielded the Titan, stopping the shots of the desperate guardsmen dead. His training had mentioned no energy field like that. All of them, from power fields to void shields, would eventually collapse under weight of fire, but this seemed stronger with every impact. Conflict resolved itself from a jag of shadows, Walker and Titan raining fire down on a knot of retreating tanks and infantry. Explosions, muffled by the storm, sounded unreal and distant, but the damage was real enough. Bannock looked on as a Chimera exploded. 3 ragged platoons of men fought desperately against scores of orcs, firing, retreating, firing again, trying to stop the massive greenskins from getting to within melee range. The fight was coming towards Bannock's ad hoc squadron, cutting an oblique line across the sand to the rear of the Lemon Russes, the heavy Walker and Titan reversing as they sought to keep their guns on the humans. Then a third shape emerged from the storm. Despite the peril of their situation, Bannock's breath caught. A Baneblade, one of the Paragonians, moving slowly backwards. Bright flashes came as Demolisher Cannon and Battle Cannon spoke as one, bringing a rain of iron plates down from the smaller Orc Walker. The Titan replied. Crackling energies vomited forth from a spiked tongue to rip the right-hand sponson from the super heavy, atomizing a score of men to the tank's side. Undaunted, the Baneblade fought on. The whole of the Baneblade shook with the impact of the psychic beam weapon. Consoles sparked and fizzed. Cortine held hard to his command station as the vehicle bucked under him. He heard Megan up above swear loudly as the shells in the turret loading rack clanked to the floor. The smell of ozone, smoke and halon fire suppressant filled the tank before being sucked out of the air by the tank's atmosphere scrubbers. "We lost the left sponson bank," shouted Eperalient. "We've damage to main fire control." "Fire." "Negative. We got a breakout in the forward compartment. Fire suppression is functioning correctly this time." "All crew, don rebreathers," ordered Cortine. The fire suppression system could suffocate a tank crew as easily as douse flame. They were supposed to be wearing their masks. If the tank's hull was breached, they'd all be breathing the planet's deadly dust, but Cortine had allowed his men to wear them as they saw fit. They were cumbersome and stank. "Keep up our fire rates." "Sir," replied Ganlik and Radin. Vand, said Cortine. He half-turned to where the third gunner's station was situated on the command deck, to the left behind the commander's station. Vand lay slumped over his twitch sticks, face studded with glass. The whole station had blown, screens gone. Marcello sat there, mouth gaping like a fish. He's dead, sir," managed the boy. "Marcello," snapped Cortine. The boy had frozen. "Marcello, pull yourself together, reroute all tertiary weapons systems to your station. You are our anti-infantry defense now. Do you understand, Marcello?" The boy nodded numbly, fumbling movements becoming surer as he applied himself to his task. Cortine fixed his eyes on the Orc Titan displayed on his chart desk, the Lesser Walker, the Orc infantry pounding wave after wave on the line of Imperial troops falling back by section, tanks at half reverse covering them. At least the retreat was orderly, but he feared that would not remain the case for long. "They'll not take another hit like that," said Bannock. "We've got to do something." The tank's gunner spoke. Sir, we have to retreat. There's no way we can take that. No way, it's only a matter of time before it kills the Baneblade. Best we get these tanks back and add our strength to a counterattack. Gunner, that Baneblade is worth 10 lemon russes. We stay and fight. Squadron, halt. He called into the Vox. Follow my mark, we have to be quick. 3 lemon russes stood shoulder to shoulder with the Baneblade, heavy bolters carving a gory swathe through the orcs. Battle cannon shots from all 4 tanks slammed into the lesser walker, part of its hull collapsing and falling to the ground. Bannock's pulse quickened. Sir, said the gunner, I must protest.
No shot can get through that energy field. You haven't seen it.
Listen, shouted Bannock. Look at the second walker, see how close it stands to the Orc Titan. Bannock pointed, but the gunner was already putting his eye to his ranging glass. Yes, sir. See how it is unaffected by its energy umbrella. It's moving right through it without a problem, but it's not covered by it. We fire at the smaller engine. If we target the smaller one's head, there's a good chance it'll collapse into the Titan. That should buy the others time to get away. Yes, sir, said the gunner, reluctantly. All tanks, halt. Drivers, man hull lascannon. I want everything we have thrown at that smaller walker on my mark, do you understand? A chorus of crackling, yes, sirs came to him. Turrets turned, the tanks maneuvered into position, then stopped one by one. Their hull-mounted lascannons came to life, tracking the head of the heavy walker, the battle cannon's turrets doing the same, moving with tiny jerks. Bannock watched the giant engines do their ponderous dance. Gradually they turned, entirely obscuring the Imperial forces to the front. We have only one chance, he said. Do not fire until I give the order. Keep targets locked. He held up his hand. Wait for it, he watched intently, watching for the right moment before giving his command. The heavy walker had to be close enough to the Titan to collapse onto it, in the right position and yet not so close that it could benefit from the energy field crackling all around the larger war machine. Further, it had to be in a position where it would cause some hindrance to the larger construct. Bannock prayed to the Emperor that the engine would not have time to recharge its Eldritch cannon before they fired. The heavy walker edged closer in towards Greenaye, perhaps trying to gain some protection from the energy shield, perhaps seeking a new target, bringing it closer to the Titan's enormous metal foot. Fire, yelled Bannock. The lemon russes unloaded everything into the heavy walker. 2 shells went wide of the head, 1 missing, 1 impacting into a shoulder. The others struck home, lines of lascannon fire seeming to guide him in. The heavy walker's head exploded with great violence. With the screech of metal upon metal, it fell onto the larger machine, sagging against it, falling onto the Titan's foot and dragging its armored skirt into the sand. Engines roared as Greenaye tried to move, the whole thing shuddering with mechanical effort, but to no avail. Greenaye was pinned fast. Bannock permitted himself a deep breath of relief. Well done men, now, let's get out of here. All ahead full. Fall back, fall back. Tank engines roaring, the lemon russes tracked round and made their getaway. Stood in the turret, Bannock watched Greenaye recede, the lesser orc engine leaning against it like a drunk back home in Aroni's city. Pinned in place, the Titan spat green fire at the withdrawing Imperials. He couldn't tell how many of the force gathered round the Baneblade had made it away, but surely some of them had. The energies spurting from the Titan ceased. Its horned head turned to the screech of unoiled bearings, round eyes blazing with the unclean light of witchcraft. They fixed themselves on Bannock and stared unblinking, locking with his own, boring deep into his very soul. The machines became an outline, then a shadow, still the green eyes glared after him, then they too were gone into the anger of Kaladar's storm. Bannock slumped down into the tank's turret chair. He was filthy and tired, and his head rang. Adrenaline receded, leaving him nauseous and weak. The loss of his men, held at bay by the thrill of battle, hit him like a shell. Arleson, Kurlik, Brevant, Tovan, Patinallo, men he'd trained with for 2 years. He was thankful he'd not known any before the raising, that would have made it worse. Dead so far from home, most likely their families would never know what had happened to their sons. He added their deaths to his burden of guilt. He'd been responsible for their safety, and he had failed, more blood on his hands. He'd survived, there was that, and he'd done his duty. Perhaps he had redeemed himself. He wasn't sure if he cared. He was too tired. He coughed and felt wetness under his mask. He reached up under it, holding his breath as he lifted the mask in a manner that had become instinctive. He pushed his fingers under the stinking rubber, wiping them at his mouth, scratching his skin with the dust layered upon it. He pulled his hand out. Blood on his fingers. Pity flicked across the small portion of the gunner's features visible between rebreather and cap. They both knew what that meant. Dust lung. Only blind fate saved me. Fate is far from blind, my son. Astropath Val speaking with unnamed trooper after the Kostoval rout, M41. Chapter 6. HELWAT City Landing Fields. The sixth moon of Paragon Vi 2,259,395, M41. Bannock walked down the long carpet to the dropship, shoulder to shoulder with the other officers of his newly raised tank regiment, the Paragonian 42nd. He tried to keep his eyes forwards as instructed, but he couldn't keep them from sliding to the side, scanning the crowd of faces in his clan's viewing stand, looking for the old man's face. Of course his father wasn't there. Bannock had wrecked the old man's carefully constructed plans to tie clans Bannock and Turanigan together. He'd lost the clan a 0.3% reduction in gross material costs in interclan trade, and his father a great deal of face. He would not come, because, according to his father, the chief auditor of Clan Bannock, Coloron Artem Lo Bannock wasn't supposed to be there either. He was supposed to be playing politics by his father's side, but he wasn't. After what had happened with Tuparilio, his father had had no choice but to agree to Bannock's request to sign up. His uncle had arranged the rest. But that was that between them. He might have allowed his eldest son to go to war, but he did not have to like it, and the old man had publicly disowned him. He'd expected it, knew it, but Bannock had hoped that he'd come, prayed for it. Even now, he was still hoping to lock eyes with the stern gaze of his father, some measure of reconciliation before he left. The clan stands, cantilevered out from the embarkation terminal, flowered high above the heads of the lesser classes of Paragon, gathered in their thousands to see their sons and daughters off to war. The crowd was immense, a sea of faces round the Gothic cliffs of the embarkation building. 40 drop ships in neat ranks filled this part of the landing apron, sequestered from the endless plain of rockcrete that was Paragon's main spaceport, needfully huge to accommodate the ships that came and went from the planet daily, bringing in raw materials from the rest of the system, carrying away the world's manufactured goods to the stars. All non-essential traffic was suspended for the week of the departure. This raising was costing Paragon dearly. Bannock marched along a rich carpet laid over the rockcrete especially for the officer cadets of the regiment. His new uniform was uncomfortable in its unfamiliarity, tight and stiff where his old clothes were loose and soft, and his head felt cold where it had been shaved down to blue stubble. The haircut of the penitent, he thought. He and the other officer cadets of the regiment walked together, nearly 100 would-be lieutenants and others, from where they'd heard the service from the chapel inside the embarkation building and enjoyed drinks at the expense of the Unified Clan Council and Planetary Commander Gondanic Lo Materiak. Theirs was a comfortable send-off, not like the enlisted men, who'd already begun basic training in the swamp outside the spaceport. He felt lightheaded from both drink and apprehension. This was only his second time in a spacecraft, and this time he would not be coming back. He looked from the corner of his eyes for reassurance from Callaghan, but his friend wore an uncharacteristically serious expression, face set resolutely forwards. He thought his father might have come because of that they'd not meet again. Most men who joined the Guard never came home, falling on some foreign field light years away, or, if surviving, granted land on untamed worlds where they could fight some more. Those that did contrive to return could find themselves arriving centuries later, travel across the galaxy being slow, the strange energies within the Immaterium warping time. That Bannock's uncle had come home, along with the 3 veteran regiments accompanying the 2 fresh raisings to Kaladar was a near miracle, simply because their homeworld lay en route from one war zone to the other, and they needed reinforcing. Good also for morale, his uncle had confided in him. The Imperial Governor had somehow arranged it, to take people's attention away from the scandals rocking court, or so the rumors went. If he did come back, it would no longer be home. The veterans who marched alongside the enlisted men up from the swamps had been recruited at 3 different points over the last century. None of them had ever been back home before, none of them had ever expected to come home, and now, after only 3 weeks on their birth world, they were leaving again and they would never be back. Their faces were grimmer than when they'd disembarked, the world and people they'd known lost to warp-born time distortion. He'd realized that, at least intellectually, from the moment he had put his mark on the recruitment paper, but now the thought of never seeing his father or mother or the rest of his family again filled him with panic. For the briefest moment he wanted to dash off, to say he had changed his mind, to go back to his father and beg forgiveness, but it was far too late for that. Perhaps that's why the carpet was lined with Navy ratings. They were large men, heavily muscled under their uniforms. The charged belaying pins they carried would put second thoughts out of anyone's mind, and not merely figuratively. He tensed as the knot of cadets passed by the stand reserved for Clan Bannock. The faces above were proud but free of emotion, as befitted members of the ruling class. There was a large gap in the stands. It looked like the entire fiscal stem of Clan Bannock had been ordered to keep away. He tried to feel angry at his father for that, one last bout of fury at the old man. Although he'd managed it so many times before, often with little encouragement, today it came harder than usual. He felt ashamed of his doubts. This was not the Bannock way. He might have ruined his life here, but he would not spoil this new one. He tried to hold his head higher. Still, he wished his father had come. The carpet went in a sweep around the elephantine landing legs of the dropship, bringing the officer cadets into line with the column of enlisted men. Ahead of him lay his future, the ship's great square ramp lowered like the jaw of some predator, waiting to swallow him whole and spit him out as living ammunition in one of the Emperor's wars. Even if they made the perilous warp journey intact, he'd probably not survive long, something his uncle had repeated time and time again to him, but Bannock would not be swayed, and his uncle had relented and pulled the requisite strings to free him from the clan exemption. If he died, so be it, it was no less than he deserved. No doubt Tuparilio would agree. He walked towards the yawning black door to the future, each step taking him one further pace away from a planet he'd never tread again. Paragon. He looked up. The gas giant they called the Mater Maxima crowded the lower half of the sky. The long eclipse was over, the long winter it brought done with, warmth returned to Paragon. The first growth season of the glory was in full blush. Another thing he'd never see again, among all the people he'd never talk to and things he'd never do. Skating on the canals in the long winter, holidays on the plains during little summer, drinking nights away with his friends in the city. The list went on as Bannock bade farewell to his privileged childhood. So be it. He had only himself to blame. Through war he would find atonement. Cheers went up from the crowd as huge tractors came crawling across the rockcrete apron towards the dropships, each pulling a long, treaded trailer crowded with newly minted fighting vehicles made in Paragon's industrial zone, equipment for the new regiments. Everything was festooned in purple and white bunting, the colors of Paragon. The celebration would surely become wild and raucous once the brave children of the world had departed. A double raising was rare here, and to see men return home almost unheard of. The crowd was suffused with pride. Paragon was surely amongst the most loyal of the Emperor's worlds, and for that they were blessed. Transporting the 20,000 men to the transport barges in orbit would take the rest of the week. The celebrations would last all that time. The lines of soldiers marched up the ramp into the dropship, soft carpet giving way to the ring of plasteel. The ramp was enormous, and led into the hold of the ship, a massive space with room enough for a company to deploy into the heart of battle. "Company, halt!" bellowed a senior sergeant, resplendent in the vermilion of Paragonian dress uniform, a uniform the recruits would not be able to wear until they had finished training and been formally inducted into the guard. About turn. The sergeant was one of the few veteran officers that Bannock had met who was actually from Paragon. The rest of the staff were drawn from other units from the same war zone the Paragonians had shipped out of, members of depleted regiments merged with the Paragonians, fit to provide a seasoned command structure for the raw recruits. Bannock and the others turned and looked upon their home for the last time. The crowd shouted, the large band playing to their cheers. The ramp began to rise. It closed slowly, huge cogs in the gloom high above cranking round and round to bring the ramp home centimeter by tortuous centimeter. Little by little, Bannock's world was shut from view. The landing apron went, then the crowds, then the stands of the clan leaders, where Bannock's father would have stood had circumstances been different. All went, swallowed by the black of the door. The embarkation building's towers disappeared, as did the smokestacks of the industrial zone about the spaceport. The last thing Bannock saw of his home were the mountains far to the south of Helwat City landing fields, the pregnant bulk of the Mater Maxima filling the sky above them. The door of the dropship shut with a hollow boom. Bannock was captive in the belly of the windowless craft. A shocked silence prevailed over the recruits. Loss was heavy in the air. It was a second of limbo, a space between one life and another. Right then, bellowed the sergeant. You young gentlemen have 4 hours, 53 minutes before loading of this rotation is complete, and I am afraid to say you will not be relaxing. Prepare yourselves for months of unending pain which I have the sorrowful duty of dishing out to turn you young popinjays into proper soldiers and officers worthy to wear the uniform of the Emperor." He sounded happy at this prospect. "You are going to hate me, my young gentlemen, but that is of no account. I will turn each and every one of you miserable dung beetles into warriors, or you will die trying." He laughed at his own joke. "Or, come now, no sad faces. You're in the Imperial Guard now." "We suffered a grave blow yesterday. The 42nd advance was turned by Orcish cunning. Several, 8, unconfirmed at this date, heavy walkers and a medium-class Titan were deployed by the enemy, resulting in the destruction of fully 3 companies of the regiment. Many more casualties were suffered by Atraxian and Paragonian mechanized forces. Somehow the Savler managed to get out in one piece, more or less. Losses: main battle tanks, destroyed, unrecoverable, 19. Main battle tanks, damaged, light, 7. Main battle tanks, damaged, severe, 4. Main battle tanks, operational, 70. Other vehicles lost or rendered inoperable, support, etc., 37. Casualties sustained, 149, 98 dead, 38 wounded, 13 MIA. Further losses were sustained early this morning when a regimental recovery team came under attack by Orc reconnaissance forces. 2 apparently salvageable Lemon Russes proved to be booby-trapped. The detonation of these by the recovery crew brought down a demi-company of Orc fast attack vehicles. 1 Atlas lost, Engineer Rancoon killed, plus 4 Munitorum Tech adepts. That I should lose so many of my men at our first engagement is a source of grave shame for me. That they are not my people matters little. Today I attempted to tender my resignation, but General Banlokism Verkrigan would not countenance it. I am to attempt to rebuild the regiment with the meager resources to hand. I fear our attempts at reinforcing the war effort here on Kaladar have come to little. Our journey here overran by 12 months, delaying our deployment by 3 seasons, and allowing the Orcs to consolidate their gains. Several of High Command are pressing to petition Castellan Avenius of the Black Templars Adeptus Astartes for further aid, but I am not hopeful. The Angels of Death know no master but our Lord the Emperor. They are few in number here, and what forces they have are heavily invested in clearing remaining Orc nests from the far side of Kaladar in conjunction with the second battle group. I fear this conflict goes ill. I shall continue to pray daily for victory." Extract, Colonel Geptera Assis Shalana's personal diaries, Commander-in-Chief, 42nd Paragonian Armored Regiment. Chapter 7. KALIDARIV, ADEPTUSMINISTORUMMEDICAE Facility, Hive Modulus 3,283,397, M41. "So this is him?" Courtine peered through the thick plex window to the room beyond, lurid with ultraviolet light, at the young lieutenant. He lay upon the gurney of an auto-chirurgeon, clan tattoo visible on his right shoulder, a tattoo that matched Courtine's own. Metal limbs were busy about him, pulling pipes depending from tanks of liquid and pushing them into his mouth, forcing his jaw painfully wide. Courtine thought it a kindness the boy was unconscious. He stared for several minutes, watching the chirurgeon. The wards he'd come through to get here were full past capacity of dead and dying men, the Medici personnel overwhelmed. The stench of burnt flesh and suppurating wounds still clung to his nostrils. The shouts and moans had been the worst, men on the edge of extinction, calling for the Emperor's final benediction, finding mercy nowhere. The viewing room was blessedly quiet, aseptic. Here important men were treated for dust lung by lungwash, a process too complicated and time-consuming to be given to the lower ranks. A commissar stood in one corner, overlooking the lungwash room, his job to oversee the treatment given to the battle group's senior officers. The look on his young face made it clear he was indifferent to Bannock's fate, and he did not so much as acknowledge the presence of Brasslock and Courtine. "He doesn't look like much," Courtine said finally. "I would not underestimate him." "This is the one," said Brasslock, "whose actions aided your escape from the Costoval Flats debacle." Courtine snorted. "Not my debacle, Engineer. These idiots have no wit at all when it comes to the Orc. They read the first passage on the greenskins they find in the Tactica Imperium, go no further and are blinded by dogma to what's in front of them. Orcs are not stupid. Whoever first committed that to paper was deluding themselves and those that followed. If only they'd read further in the Tactica, they'd know. Nevertheless, no matter where fault lies, a debacle it was, and it is thanks to this lieutenant that you lived to see this day at all. Brasslock's flesh voice caught in his throat, his artificial lungs clicking as they forced air over neglected vocal cords. He's just a boy. He's got no place aboard my tank. Your tank? The crewing of prime assets such as Mars Triumphant is of great interest to the Adeptus Mechanicus, honored lieutenant, and we have selected this boy. Our prognostication savants suggest a match higher than the 79th percentile. Maggie Rotar and Hammerweld have petitioned honored Captain Hannig, and he has acquiesced, accepting the judgment of the Omnitia. Lieutenant Coloron Artem Lobanik is to be your new third gunner. Pressure at your behest, said Cortine. I am but a humble engineer, Cortine. But I submitted the initial request, yes. Cortine shook his head. I wish you wouldn't meddle, Brasslock. I need experienced crew. It's bad enough with Marcello aboard. He consulted the file in his hand. Bannock, he's been in combat once. One does not just walk onto a super heavy tank crew. It requires training, exceptional dedication and talent. And what will his commanding officer say? The boy's a lieutenant. Becoming third gunner aboard Mars will be an effective demotion for him. Brasslock coughed his wheezing laugh. He will keep his rank. Then he outranks everyone aboard but me. That is no fit position for a third gunner. Then order him to obey your subordinates. You lose your patience with me, Cortine, when I am but the messenger. Mars Triumphant itself approves of this choice. A great confrontation is coming, it feels it. This boy will help with that. I don't want to hear any more of that, Brasslock. It informed me itself. Still pushing the line that its time is up? Affirmative. All the signs are there. You know in your heart that it is true. You listen, when you say you cannot hear. You've no idea what's going on in my head, Brasslock. I could do without this. The engineer chuckled, throaty machine grating laced with binary chitter. Take it up with Mars Triumphant if you will. If you do not believe me, consider this, skilled tank crew are at a shortage, he is one, and he has no tank. You yourself have often bemoaned the lack of suitable material for your successor. This boy has shown remarkable spirit. He took command of a leaderless rearguard unit. When he chanced upon your duel with the Xeno engine he could have turned and run, but he did not. Furthermore, it was only his exemplary judgment and skill that enabled him to save your life, and the life of the Holy Mars Triumphant, et al. For that we of Adeptus Mechanicus owe him a great debt. You would acknowledge yours if you were not so. Brasslock searched for the right word. Emotional terms employed only unusually by such as he, cold cog and hot gear needing no such designations, stubborn. That's why he's getting the lungwash, eh? They usually only give that out to higher ranks. You whispered into a few more ears no doubt. My biologian colleagues attached to the Medici were only too happy to help. Brasslock bowed his ever-shrouded head. It is such a great shame so many brave soldiers are denied this treatment, but alas, it is complex. That Bannock is receiving it all should tell you of his exceptional talent. See, he bears the mark of the machine god. A metal tendril rose from beneath Brasslock's robes and indicated Bannock's cog medallion. He has all the qualities necessary. Train him. Cortine knocked the file against his hand and exhaled hard. Brasslock was right, to an extent. The recent battle had ripped the reinforcing regiments to shreds. Troops that should have helped secure a swift Imperial victory had been fed into a trap. If Hannig hadn't seen that too and ordered the withdrawal, they'd be looking at a full-scale evacuation. As it was, they'd saved only a third of the troops committed to the battle. And now here they were, stuck right back where the Imperial army was before the reinforcements had got to Kaladar, the Imperials in Hive Modulus, the Orcs in Hive Meridan. I'm not surprised this war is going to the dogs, looking at the way these idiots are running it, thought Cortine. For a moment he longed to be back rooting out Eldar pirates from the Indrani Agri cluster. But the Dentes campaign had come to a successful close, so here they were, shipped out, 6 months back to Paragon, a supposedly 10-month trip out to Kaladar that turned into a 2-year ordeal. 3 weeks in between with his feet on the ground of a home he'd never thought to see again. How much Paragon had changed, how much dirtier, how much more run down. The effects of nostalgia, he thought, or perhaps the whole universe really is going to hell. He flipped the file over again. It had so many official stamps on its crumbling card cover that it was nearly black. One of hundreds of thousands like it. He'd had to argue for 10 minutes with a pasty-faced Munitorum clerk to get hold of it, then wait another half an hour while it was fetched from the depths of the company records. Practically lightspeed for the Munitorum. Someone other than the tech priests is pulling strings here. But Brasslock is right, he told himself as he read through a long list of training commendations. Good personnel are few and far between. This boy's record suggests he has potential. Why does he have to be so damned young? He added aloud, and shut the casing of the file with a snap. They are all young, honored lieutenant, counted Brasslock. And yet they serve. The hives of Kaladar were unlike anything Bannock had seen before. There were no hives on Paragon. Furthermore, the hostile surface of Kaladar would not permit the mountain-sized cities other hive worlds possessed, with which Bannock was familiar from vidcast and book. On Kaladar, each hive centered on a shaft punched into the crust of the planet, a hole wide enough to swallow a cruiser. The better districts were a third of the way down the shaft, round the sides, their presence marked out by domed parks and palace promontories extending into the void. The further one went up or down the shaft, the poorer the area, likewise the further away from it into the earth. The domains of the Hive Lords thus formed a toroid about the middle, a sealed domain of luxury denied the majority of the planet's population. Industry was concentrated round the lip above and below ground, while deep down were the mines, workings following the veins of precious Lorelei far out into the desert. Hive Modulus was on the front line, the nearest of the world's 4 human-held hives to Hive Meridan, which the Orcs had snatched from the defenders nearly 3 years earlier. Swathes of the upper levels of Modulus had been requisitioned by the Departamento Munitorum to billet the Imperial forces, its workshops given over to vehicle repair, yet Modulus worked on under the nose of the enemy, mining and processing Kaladar's rare mineral wealth. Bannock felt weak after his treatment, his lungs ragged, but had been ordered to report to 42nd Regimental Command to receive new orders immediately, and so he made his way on the city's spiral uproad, which, with its downroad twin, formed an elegant helix inside the city shaft. Looking down from the road gave Bannock vertigo, so he kept to the inner pedestrian way, away from the harsh light of the sky above. The road was heavy with traffic. Units of guardsmen jogged past. Industrial wagons ground upwards laden with tons of ore or with the sand that needed to be dredged constantly from the lower levels. But it was the work gangs of native Kaladarians that fixed Bannock's attention. Every third hour a klaxon sounded and 100 nondescript doors hissed open, disgorging workers for the shift change. They went past Bannock in endless streams, their appearance shocking, pallid, slight beings, covered with sores. Most had their rebreathers implanted, their mouths hidden under oxidized metal. Cracked flesh surrounded these metal snouts, tubes that could be attached to nutrient packs dangled from them, the implants preventing the taking of solid food. Thick pipes ran over their shoulders to bulky cylinders upon their backs. They were bald, and nearly all showed the milky eyes of the blind, sight taken from them by Kaladar's abrasive dust. With a jolt of shock, Bannock saw that more than half of them bore minor signs of mutation and deformity, withered additional arms, twisted backs, crooked limbs, and worse. Revulsion filled him. They moved in human chains at a shuffling jog, left arm clasping the left shoulder of his fellow to the front, thin metal wires running through eyelets on collars to ensure they would not separate. The collars did not look as if they would come off. The workers were so emaciated he could not tell the women from the men, and their stench was astonishing. Each work party, hundreds strong, was led by a Puraborn overseer, better fed, better clad, the only Kaladarians Bannock saw on the road wearing goggles. Each carried a tall staff in one hand topped with a crackling prod, in the other they rang a bell, marking the steps of the workers with dolorous chimes. Stand, wretch, stand. The sharp discharge of electricity reached Bannock as he made another slow turn of the spiral road. A party of workers stood, heads bowed, while their overseer set to work on one of their number, collapsed on the rockcrete. Stand. Bannock watched, the scene momentarily obscured by a road train rumbling up the carriageway. When he could see again, the overseer was stabbing at the worker upon the floor, each jab accompanied by a crack of energy. He turned to go, no concern of his, but a hand grasped his bicep, staying him. "Does it shock you, Lieutenant?" said a voice right in his ear. Bannock turned to look into the face of a veteran of the Paragonian 23rd, one of 3 Paragonian regiments brought in from the Dentaires war zone and shipped over with the 2 new raisings from their home world. He had a hard face. Bannock was cautious. He wore the markings of a peacekeeper, the Paragon regiment's military arbitrators, and his eyes brimmed with hostility. Bannock's brow furrowed. Why should it shock me? These workers, they can't speak, can't eat, most are blind, said the peacekeeper. They neuter them, you know that. Does that not raise a little pity in you? Sir, said Bannock, standing tall, smoothing down his uniform. Don't tell me what to think. These workers are genetically impure, beneath human. What of it? The older man's face grew harder still. That may be so, but tell me, sir, is it any different for men of purer birth? What about on Paragon? Bannock inclined his head. At home the workers are cared for as per the teachings of the Adeptus Ministorum. Alms are provided to the poor and those rendered unfit for work. Is that so? Is that so? The peacekeeper nodded in a way that suggested anything but agreement. How many times did you go down onto the shop floor of your own clam workshops? What are you? A Bannock? I recognize the face. Do you think your folks back home treated their workers much better? My family worked hard, until a bad debt cast my father into the prison foundries of our clan and me into the army. I went to visit my father once. Only once. I couldn't stand it. It killed him soon enough. They aren't much better than this, the debtors' manufacturer, no matter what the clanlords might say about Paragonian virtues. What do you think happens to the likes of them back home? You ever recall seeing a man like that? He pointed out a man with a tiny head, almost conical, idiot eyes rolling in his face. Or like that. Another, this one with miniature limbs halfway up his ribcage terminating in a pair of backwards feet. Think on that. At least here these poor Bazdags get to live. At home they don't even drown them before they toss them into the incinerator. This is the way things are, son. Live with it, and spare me your hypocrisy. Paragons know better. I could have you arrested for this, said Bannock, painfully aware still of the crackles of the prod. Surely, even for a debased creature like the mutant, enough was enough. As a peacekeeper I have jurisdiction over you. Those are the Captain General's standing orders and as such they supersede anything you might have to say on the matter. Who do you think they'll believe, a boy, an aristocrat's brat, or a proven servant of the Emperor? The overseer had stopped thrashing the worker. He knelt down and roughly examined the prone man, then pulled a small pair of clippers from a pouch at his belt, and cut the worker free from his collar. He rearranged his blind slaves, rolled the dead man out over the roadway, and pitched him down the central shaft. He returned to his troop, rang his bell 3 times, and the column set off again. Now, do you have anything to say to me? Bannock shook his head. Good lad, sir, said the peacekeeper. Now on your way, and think on what you had, and how you got it, next time you dream of home. Bannock arrived at the 42N's regimental HQ 5 minutes early, but was shown in to see the colonel by his adjutant, a fussy little guardsman, right away. Colonel Shalana was short and dark with eyes of a piercing yellow. He came from some world Bannock had never heard of and had an accent he struggled to cope with. Detached from his original unit, Shalana had been put in charge of the Paragonian 42nd Armored Regiment, there not being enough experienced Paragonian officers left from the Dentaires veterans to spare in staffing the new raisings. At ease, Lieutenant. Come, sit down. Shalana gestured with a deep brown hand to the chair before his desk. Bannock sat. That's better. I don't stand much on ceremony. I find being cooped up in a tank quite restrictive enough without having everyone leaping to attention all the time, especially when we're talking like now, in an informal little chat. Bannock said nothing. He'd heard mixed reports about Shalana's informal little chats. Will you be wanting a drink, Lieutenant? Asked Shalana. No, sir. Well, perhaps it is a little early. He eyed the decanter of liquor on his desk suspiciously. And I will admit, that although I find much admirable in the culture of Paragon, this Gleis, sir, said Bannock. Gleis, yes, I find it not entirely to my taste. It is a little thick, I suppose, yes. I rather prefer a good Amasek. Still, he said brightly, I suppose I will get used to it eventually. No. I won't keep you, Bannock, so I'll get right to the point. You're to be transferred. Sir. The regiment is not in a good way. We lost half our personnel and a quarter of our fighting vehicles in the Costoval Flats. Stragglers still trickle in, but, he raised his hands. I trust you understand, this is all in the strictest confidence. The colonel spun his chair away from the desk, once the property of the refinery manager. The buildings of the facility protruded above the ground, and Shalana's office had a good view out over the refinery's topside grounds, cleared to provide a marshalling yard for the regiment. The green sky was clear and the window shielding was open, showing the red-grey deserts of Kaladar stretching away beyond the mass of buildings of Modulus's surface town. Further out on a large section of desert bulldozed flat was the battle group's landing field, cluttered with dropships, shuttlecraft and cargo lifters. I have been a soldier for many years, Bannock. Morale, that's the thing, low morale can kill a regiment more surely than a well-placed virus bomb, and the 42N's is at rock bottom. That's one of the reasons I've given leave for this transfer to go ahead. He turned back to face the lieutenant, reached into a drawer in the metal desk and took out an envelope. He leaned forwards and handed it to Bannock. "It's a shame to lose you. You showed real initiative out there. Although," he chuckled, "if I were of another mind I could have you shot for ordering the rearguard to fall back, but I prefer to be flexible." His grin broadened. "You're proud." Bannock opened the envelope. Within was a sheet of onion skin paper, typed with his new assignment, the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company. Bannock's eyes widened. He looked to Shalana, his face questioning. "You understand, your new position will not be a demotion. Although you will be fulfilling the role of third gunner, you will keep your rank of lieutenant. This, though unusual, is the quickest way to the command of one of those behemoths. They do that, you know, bring in new blood, select promising tankers, put them in a junior role, see if they've got what it takes." He wagged a finger. "You're going places, Lieutenant. Knowing that will give your comrades remaining under my command great cheer. Cortine's a good man, bit of a loner, but I suppose you have to be to command a machine like that." He paused for a space. "You've also been put forward for commendation, by me. Congratulations." He shoved a small box across the table. "No time for ceremony, I'm afraid. Wear it with pride, eh?" But Bannock was not listening. He was going to serve aboard a Baneblade. The rest of what Shalana had to say washed over him. He found himself outside, clutching orders and medal in a daze. He fished out his Aquila and cog from within his shirt and kissed both reverently in turn. Whatever he had done to deserve this chance at redemption, he swore in his heart not to let the Emperor down. Chapter 8. Aronis City, the 6th moon of Paragon Vi 2,103,395, M41. Bannock had only a few days until he was due to attend the Paragonian Military Academy. A few months later he'd ship out. Now was as good a time as any to tell his fiancée. He drew in a deep breath, and shook. In some ways, telling Kythela the wedding was off was far more terrifying than going to war. He rallied himself, and knocked on the door. "Come in." Kythela Bane Lo Turanigan's terse voice sounded from the other side of the ornate doors, their wood heavy with gilt plasterwork. Two liveried bondsmen swung him aside, admitting Bannock to the office of the Warden of Clan Turanigan. She stood behind a desk whose impressive size barely filled a corner of the massive room. The curtains were pulled against the eclipse's wan day and the fireplace was filled side to side with burning logs, struggling to keep the chill of the long winter at bay. To one side of it stood the steward of Turanigan, reading silently from a ledger, while next to him an enhanced savant burbled nonsense and accounting figures to no one in particular, piles of printed parchment around his feet, issuing from the records unit embedded in his chest. Kythela didn't look up from her charts as Bannock came into the room. A large fur was thrown over her slender shoulders, her face creased as always in a frown. She stroked at a goblet of Glees as she read and reread the sheets before her. "Come to apologize, have you?" A servant moved to take Bannock's furs, but he shooed him away. He hunted around for a chair that was not piled high with sheets of vellum or production flimsies. He gave up, instead shifting the smallest pile he could find onto the floor before moving the chair as near to the fire as was polite and sitting down. "It's not like that, Kythela," he began, and stumbled to a stop. He rubbed his face, not knowing what to say. The last week had been impossible. Tuparilio's face haunted his dreams. He was drawn and pale, his eyes yellow from too much sleep and wine. He felt weak, but he had no appetite for food. Kythela looked up and stared at him hard. She'd always been a tough one. Bannock had seen that when they'd been at the Collegium together, even before her father's death had made her clan productiva and driven the girl from her once and for all. But today, Bannock thought, her eyes were a little softer, there was hurt in him too. "I've never thought highly of you, Coloron," she said matter-of-factly. "You're a rake more interested in bedding bondskirt and drinking your family's wealth than making something of yourself. I pity you for it. I really do. All you male scions are like that. You're expected to be, hanging off the say-so of your fathers until they hand on their office to you and die." She barked out a sharp, bitter laugh. "While we girls stay at home and behave like good daughters. Not me, though, not me, no brother." She cast her gaze around the room at the heaped papers. "I thought you might be a little different, but you are not. You are a drunken idiot like the rest of them, puffed up with honor. What was it? Did Tuparilio look at one of your girlies funny? He was a boy, Coloron, a little boy. You should have slapped him and sent him on his way." "It wasn't like that," Look, can we not talk about this please? He was intent. He couldn't tell her. He didn't want to involve her in his guilt. He gave up, exasperated with himself. Listen to me, I have come here because I have something to say. Her facade suddenly cracked. Whatever you say, it's no excuse. No excuse. I cannot have my betrothed becoming involved in common dueling. Barbarism. Have you any idea how embarrassing this is? What shame it is to have my betrothed whispered about as a kinslayer. It's hard enough to run a clan department as a woman as it is, and now I have my future husband rampaging like a show beast. I will not stand for it. To think I thought you might be able to cope with this, she shouted, waving at the mess of documents. To help me, how wrong I was. She punctuated her words by beating upon the table with a delicate fist. Her goblet had fallen, spilling grease onto the papers. It dripped onto the carpet, unnoticed. It is too much to hope for a love match, but in you I at least had hopes for a profitable partnership. Now, because of your behavior you owe great indemnity, the alliance is in jeopardy and the finances of both clans will suffer. You're lucky I don't terminate the agreement. I need Clan Bannock's backing to secure. She is beautiful, thought Bannock, and he felt a tenderness for her that surprised him. Perhaps it would have been a good match. Kythe, he interrupted gently. You are right. I would be nothing but a liability to you. What do you mean, you would be? Kythe, I'm sorry, Look, I don't know how to say this. I'm withdrawing from the marriage contract. Bannock hurried on before she could react, gabbling. I have enlisted in the Guard, in the new double founding. I'll be leaving as soon as the long winter is done. It's not you, it's this business with the jewel. Say his name, he thought, tell her why he called you out. He couldn't. I can't serve the Emperor here. I've proved that, you're right. I will go and fight in his wars and, if he is willing, give service with my body and blood. I'm sorry. Kythala's mouth dropped wide, then snapped shut. Her features hardened. I have to get away. I saw Tuparilio's mother, my aunt, my mother, they know. Get out, she said. Kythe. Get out, she shouted. She scooped up her goblet and hurled it at him. It sailed past his head, cracking the face of a plaster putty on the wall behind him. The two bondsman bodyguards re-entered the room and made towards him. Bannock left. The winter day outside seemed as bleak as his prospects. Chapter 9. KALIDARIV, Hive Modulus 3,286,397, M41. Bannock was forced to wait for several hours before his liaison showed up. His belongings crammed into his kit bag, he sat outside the barracks of the 42nd Paragonian Armored Regiment on a poorly made metal chair. He was nervous, whether of meeting the tank or its commander Courtine he wasn't sure. Either one he did not wish to disappoint. As a boy he'd imagined fighting aboard a super heavy tank, playing a game, imagining himself a hero like his uncle, who'd gone to war while Bannock was a boy. There was a statue in the clan hall, a bust of a man his tutor had told him commanded a super heavy tank, an honored man. Bannock had often daydreamed that he was that man. The man was honored Lieutenant Marcan Courtine Low Bannock, his rank in the style of Paragon, for as the Paragonians made machines they especially revered them. To serve aboard a Baneblade was a great honor for Bannock, to serve under a man who'd inspired him even greater, but it was an honor Bannock felt sure he did not deserve, and so he sat there with a mixture of dread and excitement churning in his stomach. He would have laughed at the perversity of fate were he not so on edge. War was supposed to have been an impossibility for him, no matter how much he had played and later duelled, and yet here he was. It was all thanks to Tuparilio. Thoughts ran round his head as he waited, taking his mind off the recent defeat at Costoval and the disappearance of his foster brother Callaghan. The barracks were situated in a food store 5 turns below the surface, not far from the Medici facility where Bannock had been treated. The men had complained about how far away they were from their vehicles. It wasn't a problem Bannock had to worry about now, nor did many of his colleagues. There were many empty beds in the enlisted men's dormitory and officers' rooms. Callaghan's room was empty too. It had been hard to find anyone who knew what had happened to him, so many members of the regiment were dead or injured. He'd searched until he hit upon a crowd of men huddled around a casualty list pinned up on the wall of the mess. He fought his way through, eyes scanning the flimsies to find what he had feared. Callaghan, Laszlo Gratamar Low, 2,098,231, Lieutenant, MIA, was all it had said. No matter how many times he reread it, it did not tell him anything more. Eventually he tracked down a junior support sergeant attached to Callaghan's platoon. He told Bannock that only 2 of his friend's 4 tanks had made it back into the depot, Callaghan's own disappearing into the sandstorm. This last the sergeant had heard from a sponson gunner, sole survivor of Callaghan's 3 tanks, and currently under the Medici. Bannock pressed him for more information, but he had little to give. Missing in action on Caladar was death postponed. Bannock became morose. Callaghan had been his closest friend for as long as he could remember, an inter-clan fostering. Clan Callaghan had taken Bannock's older brother, his family had got Callaghan in return. Dark-eyed, cheeky, quick with his words, much to the annoyance of the Bannock tutors and, later, the masters at the Collegium. Bannock thought his father would strike him for his impudence, but Callaghan had drawn something warm out in the old man, and he'd become much loved. Bannock remembered how all Callaghan's bravado had gone in the first night when he'd cried for his own folk. Since then they'd been like brothers, and now he was gone. Bannock silently prayed, "You should have taken me in his stead. He was a better man than I, for all his blasphemy. He didn't deserve to die." And Bannock thought further that the Emperor was cruel to torment him in this way, no matter his crimes. He waited for grief, but it did not come. He felt oddly numb, more weary than anything else. His callousness depressed him further, his emotions were being abraded by Caladar. Death in war is to be expected, he told himself. I will mourn Callaghan when I have done my duty. Exhausted, Bannock drifted into semi-consciousness, aware of his surroundings, the scrape of cheap furniture, the murmur of men on cleanup duty, the scribble of a pen on the casualty listings on the nearby wall as some adjutant or another made an adjustment to the roll call of the dead, and then he fell asleep. A boot kicked his, and he jerked awake. "Hi," said the man before him, small and wiry with a grin that screamed insubordination. He proffered a dirty hand. Bannock hesitated, shaking sleep from his mind, and took it. He shook it as firmly as he could. It was slick with grease. The man's uniform was equally filthy. "I'm Radon, first gunner aboard Mars Triumphant. Sorry I'm so late, but we've been having no end of Bazdak troubles with the cannon targeting unit. We got pretty beat up back there at Costaval, not as bad as your boys, but still," he shrugged. "You want me to take that?" Radon pointed to Bannock's kit bag, and continued talking without drawing breath. "You're Bannock, right? Nice to meet you. Damn shame about Vand. He was our 3rd gunner before you, but always nice to meet a new face. It can get a bit antisocial being a tanker, but I guess you know that, huh, Lieutenant?" Bannock got to his feet and stretched. "Come with me, come on, come on. I managed to requisition a ground car. We can drive back in style." He winked in a way that suggested requisition was a synonym for steal. He paused as he bent to lift Bannock's bag. "Sorry, the honored lieutenant says I'm always gabbling on. Can't stop talking, ha. That's my problem, but I can shoot straight, they all say that about me. What by the throne have you got in this?" Radon bent down and opened Bannock's bag. He rummaged through it and began tossing objects onto the floor. "Sorry, but you won't be needing this, or this, or this. Not much storage on board. Say, I better leave this, looks like it has sentimental value. But definitely not this." Bannock moved to protest, he even considered ordering him to stop, but wasn't sure. In pure rank terms, he outranked Radon, but as first gunner, Radon technically had seniority over him on the tank crew until the honored lieutenant said otherwise. "You got a spare rebreather?" He zipped up the bag, leaving a pile of Bannock's possessions to one side. "No, you're going to need one, we often operate out for long periods. Last thing we need is for you to be jumping every time a bit of dust comes floating in. I'll make sure we get you one. Right then, ready, let's go, this way, this way." The little gunner stopped again, a puzzled frown crossing his brow beneath his red hair. "You know what, Lieutenant, you don't say much." Radon drove the requisitioned ground car like a maniac, weaving through the traffic with centimeters to spare as he climbed the uproad and took to the ways between the thick-walled buildings of Modulus's surface town. On the flat, he drove even more badly, all the way to the factory where the 7th currently had its home. Long lines of infantry went by in a blur as Radon accelerated, chattering away as he drove. He turned off the overroute without signaling, causing a double-decked ore truck to blare angrily. He powered into a building emptied of ore and foundry vehicles to accommodate the 7th, and skidded to a halt in one of a series of partitioned ore stalls. "Sorry if I scared you," said Radon with a smirk, patently anything but apologetic. "Good job I'm not the driver, eh?" He pulled his respirator on. "You'll need yours on too. The building's not fully sealed. I've been told that on a day like this, it doesn't really matter, but I'm not taking any chances, I don't know about you." Bannock followed suit, the memory of the lungwash still raw. They got out of the car, accompanied by a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and walked past lines of manufactory equipment onto the main floor. The machines that worked there in peacetime had been shunted carelessly to the other side of the half-kilometer wide room, the rockcrete in the middle scarred with scrape marks where they'd been dragged out. In their place was a hollow square about 200 meters across. One side was walled off by prefabricated barracks buildings, boxes stacked one atop the other, each accessed through a flexible airlock. Store blocks, pallets of spare parts, a small Adeptus Mechanicus shrine, a portable Ministorum chapel on fat wheels and munitions stacks made up 2 more walls. The fourth side of the square was open, facing the doors to the warehouse. Bannock breathed a little quicker of the rebreather fouled air as he caught sight of what stood before them, the remaining 3 super heavy tanks of the 7th Paragonian Super Heavy Tank Company. The Baneblade Artemon Ultras, the Hellhammer Ostracan's rebirth, our captain's ride. He likes blasting things up close, and of course, the Baneblade Mars Triumphant. Ours, said Radon, indicating each of the tanks in turn. As you can see, we took a bit of a beating. Always comes through though, Mars Triumphant is, a millennium old and still going strong. Oldest tank in the company. Radon glanced at the empty space on the floor, a box of white paint where Lux Imperator should have stood. They got the Shadow Sword though, Bazdak Orcs. The pair of them made the sign of the Aquila, Paragon style, sharing for a moment comradeship in the memory of the dead vehicle. Each tank was more than 13 meters long, over 8 wide, the tallest of them towering 3 times the height of a tall man. The Lemon Russ that Bannock had been trained to command seemed puny in comparison, for every tank here was the equal of a squadron of Lemon Russes, or a full-strength platoon of infantry. And he was going to serve on one. By the throne, he didn't deserve this. Hey, now that's the right response, said Radon at Bannock's wide-eyed silence. Come on, your new posting awaits. Radon made off to Mars Triumphant, Bannock trailing in his wake, unable to take his eyes off the Baneblade. The 2 Baneblades were of the Martian pattern and differed from one another only in minor detail. Both sported a 4-mounted demolisher cannon, a twin-linked heavy bolter turret beside it. Both had battle cannons as their main weapons in double-hatched turrets, rocket-assisted models with longer, vented barrels that were more powerful and further ranged than those mounted on the Lemon Russ. Both had a coaxial autocannon beside their main guns, more for ranging than for destruction. Both carried 2 pairs of twin auxiliary fuel tanks up and behind their track guards, either side of reactor plants that muttered and hummed even as the tanks slept. Both carried a sponson bank of remotely operated weapons on either side, although Mars Triumphant had lost one of hers in the fight, more twin-linked heavy bolters with a 90-degree arc of fire to the side and a turreted lascannon atop the sponson with 270 degrees of movement. It was on the turret the 2 tanks differed, Mars Triumphant carrying a pintle stubber on its left hatch that the other Baneblade, Artemon Ultras, lacked. Mars Triumphant had a larger comms array to the turret's rear, more stowage and a periscope mounting carved with 2 winged battle saints either side of the glass. Indeed, Artemon Ultras was altogether plainer, lacking the decoration and scrollwork that Mars Triumphant had, and Bannock guessed it must be because of the Baneblade's great age. This was a revered vehicle, a living relic, a testimony to the persistence and power of the Imperium of Man. She is beautiful, isn't she? Said Radon. She's looking a little out of sorts right now, but don't you worry, we'll fix her right up. Many panels had been removed from the tanks, revealing the machinery beneath. Lines led from batteries of machines and fuel tanks. Power loaders stalked noisily between pallets of shells, power cells, spares and rations. Sparks arced from welding torches. Servitors trudged back and forth, or stood in place, precisely performing repetitive tasks. Tech priests watched over all, interrupting their chants and prayers to deliver sharp rebukes to those less devout, or to communicate with the machine spirits within the vehicles. Although the full company required 40 crewmen to man the vehicles, the number of support staff they required to keep them supplied and functioning was almost quadruple that. The super heavies dwarfed all. Like chained monsters they rose up from amidst the activity all about them, quiescent, yet clearly the true power in the room. Swarmed over by tech priests, their cyborg servitors and men of the Munitorum, they were patient, like beasts being cleaned of parasites by lesser creatures. Their aura of strength was almost overwhelming, as if at any time they chose they could rise up and swat away the bustle. An Atlas recovery tank was drawn up by the damaged flank of Mars Triumphant, the shell of a sponson hanging from it. Cables and wires like intestines spilled from a hole in the Baneblade's side. New plates of armor and parts showed where the tank had been hit by the Orc Titan's strange weapons and repaired, free of paint, glistening like new scar tissue. The damage had appeared grave to Bannock's eyes in the battle, but ministered to by the tech priests it seemed a flesh wound, and the tank sat there unperturbed. 2 tech priests were busy at the side as the sponson came down, one plugged into a panel in the side of the Atlas by Mechadendrite. The 2 screeched Binaric in staccato audio bursts at each other as Radon and Bannock passed, their gesticulating speaking volumes as to their disagreement. "That one there," said Radon, pointing, "is Engineer Adept Brasslock. You'll be seeing a lot of him, and him." He pointed at a servitor stood to one side, and Bannock recognized it as the one he and Callaghan had seen on the barge. It was equipped for war, a heavy bolter plugged into its shoulder socket. "That's Eartho, the 2 are rarely apart. See one, the other will be close by. Take my advice and never, ever lose your temper with Brasslock. Eartho does not take kindly to it. Some say he's got a scrap of personality left in his scraped-out brain, but me, I just think it's clever conditioning or something." They went round the back of the Baneblade, the tank's reactor power plant looming above them. Radon showed Bannock the crew ladder, hard by the plant on the left-hand side, and together they clambered aboard. They went up onto the wide shoulder of the main deck roof, upon which sat the turret. "Here." Radon banged on a hatch beneath his feet with his heel. "You can get into the main deck, it's a squeeze, brings you right in over the tech station, only for escape or emergency, annoys Vorkoxygen if you use it to get in and out, but don't let that stop you. There." Radon paused and pointed along the tank to the front, 4 of the main deck, is another access hatch that leads into the forward compartment up where the driver's station is. It comes down right on the second gunnery chair, so I'd avoid it unless you want to end up in Ganlick's lap, and trust me, you don't. That's where you'll be, sometimes, when Sergeant Ganlick is on other duties or off rotation, but mostly you're in third gunnery, which is all remote controlled from the command deck. We'll go in through the top, that way you can see where everything is. Ganlick is that ox over there. See?" Radon pointed out a bald head bobbing about near to the hull-mounted demolisher cannon. "Oi, lick." Radon produced a small nut from in his overalls and bounced it off Ganlick's head. The body it attached to unfolded to a ridiculous height. Not only was he one of the tallest tankers Bannock had ever seen, but among the biggest of men. That he could squeeze himself into a tank even so big as the Baneblade was a surprise. "Big as an orc he is," said Radon to Bannock, "smells like one too." Ganlick. "Frag you, you skinny little Bazdak," growled the huge man, and bent back down to his task. "Hey, I thought I'd introduce you. Be nice. This is Lieutenant Bannock, our new 3rd gunner and brass trainee." "Frag him too," grumbled the sergeant. "He's got a foul temper, the one. Only talks when he's after something, but he's as superstitious as they come, so he's not too much trouble inside, because he doesn't want to upset Mars Triumphant. See that big medallion on his neck? Bought it for a month's wages the day we got here off some sand-dwelling Bazdak. Idiot. Supposed to bring protection from ghosts or some such. Still, if you want to know something, he can find it out. He might not say much, but Ganlick could get a commissar to spill his guts given enough time. It's a real knack he has. Come on," he said, and led Bannock up onto the wide turret of the Baneblade. 2 large hatches sat side by side, one proud of the other, jutting out of the turret's side to form an observation cupola, the other ringed by a well-maintained vision block, and mounting a heavy stubber on a rail. 2 periscope units and targeting arrays were to the front of the turrets, external comms gear to the rear. Radon pressed his forefinger into a slot by the vision block hatch. A clunk of a lock disengaging came from within. "We'll get your print patterned inside," he said. "All these lock down automatically. Just one of the many benefits of serving on board a genuine Mars-made war machine. Of course, you can still open them by hand from the inside, otherwise we might be in trouble, eh?" "That's good," said Bannock. "These Mars tech too." He indicated the auger lenses to the front of the hatches. "Oh, all Mars tech," nodded Radon. "Real sophisticated stuff. Vorkoxygen, that's our tech adept, can't make head nor tail of most of it. That's why we have Brasslock, Crampspan and the other engineers permanently attached to the unit." "Well, we had Crampspan." Radon's normal bluster trailed off at the mention of the Shadow Sword's engineer, no doubt dead with the rest. "It's the kind of stuff an adept would sell his grandmama to learn about. Brasslock probably had. And you ain't seen nothing yet, Lieutenant." "Oh no." He hopped through the hatch. Bannock waited for a moment before following on down, having to twist his body to one side to avoid the fire step inside the turret. Inside there was not enough room to stand. Bannock hunched over, and looked around. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the gloom, lit by the red and green of multiple screens and what light came in through the hatch. "The gunnery deck," said Radon proudly. "Where you're standing is where Megan, my loader, stands when he's up here. This is me, main gunnery." He grabbed a much-patched, high-backed chair set partway into the turret floor and gave it an affectionate shake. "Right by the main gun. That's my suite. Nice, eh? I get the secondary scope directly in. That's the small boxy one next to the big fancy one up there." He rapped a knuckle against the ceiling, though the honored lieutenant gets the feed off it. "Told you the tech was good. The commander sits below, not like in one of your lemon russes. This, oh no. Too much going on to have him isolated up here in the turret. Although of course all the main feeds to his TAC displays come direct from the top, gives him a good view," he pointed up. "And there is a secondary command chair to the back here." He pointed to a cramped cubby hole in the observation cupola. "If he needs a lookout top, he can direct us all from up here." It was oppressively hot inside the turret, airless, noisy with muted voices and the hammering of engineering works on the outside. Megan's job right there. He pointed out a shell rack and a boxy shell lift hard to the central turret well. 6 shells sat to attention, ready for action. They were half the height of a man, crowding the turret further. Between him, the breech of the gun, access points and the main gunnery station, there was little space to move. Ralt sends them up from the shell store on the lower deck. Sometimes Megan gets a bit bored and rattles off a few shots from the stubber. "Don't touch it, he thinks it's his," he added conspiratorially. "Gets real jealous, so he does." "Now, down here." Radon went over to the turret ladder well, set centrally so access could be had at all times between turret and main decks, the shell elevator hard by it. The main command deck. They descended into a room, the sides of which formed an irregular octagon, viewing cupolas of armor glass set into each facet. The track units ran under the extreme edges of the deck, the space they occupied creating shelves down either side of the compartment, both full of equipment. Like the turret, it was incredibly cramped and hot. "This is where Cortine sits." He gestured to a high-backed seat, multiple TAC displays in front of it. "And that there," he said, pointing to another tanker, stripped down to his vest, skin running with sweat, tattoo of the Eperalient clan clearly visible, is Second Lieutenant Eperalient, commsman and second in command. "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant," said Eperalient, and went back to whatever he had been doing.
His comms suite and Cortain's command suite formed a continuous L-shaped run down the right side of the room and across the front, Eperalient's chair set at right angles to that of the commander, rails allowing it an easy run up and down the bank of monitors, logic engines and auger readouts.
Cortine's station included a chart desk, a highly sophisticated cogitator display capable of 3-dimensional map projection, something Bannock had only ever seen in static facilities before. Radon had been right about the level of technology aboard. "This is you, 3rd Gunnery Station, all remotes. You'll be primarily responsible for the sponson weaponry and the hull turret heavy bolter, because Outlander's always too busy actually driving to fire that. You can actually man all the guns from this station, twitch stick activated mostly." Radon activated a few screens, dragging his fingers across them, pushed some of the station's bewildering array of controls. Radon noticed Bannock's expression of concentration. "Don't worry, it's much more sophisticated than a lemon Russ, but you'll get the hang of it. It'll do half the work for you. Mars Tech, Wise-A, all STC stuff, but not like the templates we have back on Paragon. Only the higher tech adepts can manage this level of systems integration. Make sure you pray to it properly, at least when Brasslock's around. Oh, and don't try and run my gun remotely, okay? What I said about Megan and his weapon goes doubly for me, just so's we're clear. That's mine and mine alone, and I don't like other people touching it, unless I'm dead, ha. Then help yourself, because I'll be past caring," he grinned. "Now, there's space in this second chair for your loader, Marcelo. He's just a kid, but he's a pretty good shot, and with both of you working the console you should be able to put out a high rate of fire. Try not to fire off too much in one burst. The bolters don't often go dry, the hoppers have 4,000 rounds in them each, but the interior reloading systems don't always work so well. The only reliable way to reload is to clear out and refill the entire system. That's through the sponson access hatch, and they're on the outside. If you do need a reload, that's Marcelo's job, just don't send him out in the middle of a firefight. Don't worry about the las cannons too much, they're run directly off the power plant, so no energy packs there to worry about, though the shunts sometimes burn out. If they do, Marcelo or Tech Adept Vorkossigen can swap them pretty quick. Basically, both of you fight. Anything goes wrong, you carry on firing, Marcelo or the tech adept will sort it. Tech stations to the rear. He indicated another large station, second only in size to the comms suite, at the back along the longest face of the irregular octagonal room. The floor stepped up to this, meaning it was not possible to stand at all in that part of the compartment. The tech adept would have to slide into the depression housing his seat, the back of which nearly bumped the low ceiling. The whole deck was crammed with tech, the shell elevator and turret well ladder cutting right up the middle so that it was almost unrealistic to expect 5 men to work in there. The combat stations were so close they'd all be rubbing elbows. There was far less space in the tank than Bannock had expected, a consequence of thick armor, multiple systems and the 10-strong crew needed to operate it all. Access to the lower deck is this way. Radon moved over to a kidney-shaped slot to the front left of the compartment. They clambered down a ladder to a corridor beneath. For the first time, they could stand up almost straight, although Bannock's shoulders brushed either side of the narrow gangway. The air below was even thicker and hotter than in the 2 decks above. The command deck floor sits low, but there are stores underneath, plus 3 bunks. He showed Bannock 3 openings leading into boxes as small as coffins. When we're traveling, we rotate. You get time to grab some shut-eye, do so. We're in demand and can be in the field for weeks. He rolled his eyes and grinned as he said this. Your locker's here too. He banged on a tiny door. Glad I made you leave all that rubbish behind. I thought so. You might want to take that jacket and shirt off later, as I'm sure you've noticed it's very hot in here. But let's meet the honored lieutenant first while you're looking respectable, make a good impression, eh? We've got bunks in the barracks, but we never see them, so if you want something to hand, keep it here. He turned round and faced the track unit's inner wall. This door in the track unit goes out into the bolter hoppers. From here we can replenish the sponsons during an engagement. There's another in the shell room. Feed magazines in, shell side first, the tank's autoloaders take care of the rest. Or I should say, should always jamming, the damn things, so don't rely on it. What did I say? Bannock, entranced by the Baneblade, was flustered by Radon's sudden question, but recovered quickly. Short bursts, he managed. That's right, but like I say, if we're reloading, that's Marcelo's job. This cabling's for the las cannons. He pointed out thick bundles of power lines heading to the reactor. Try not to catch your shoulders on the clasps, they're sharp as razors and they'll make you bleed like a stuck hog. Watch out for the quick release caps, knock one of them the wrong way and you'll have the best part of the battery's charge running through you. It's supposed to make them easy to swap out, and we do need to, but it's a hazard if you ask me. This way, he turned and pointed towards the front of the Baneblade, is the driver and second gunner's compartment, but we'll leave that, that's Ganlick's and Outlander's realm. Outlander's never out of there. Even in base he sleeps in his chair. It's so hard to stop him driving. The honored lieutenant's given up, overlooks his Glees habit, because he's the best driver there is in this army, on the source or off it. He's there right now, should be if old habits are anything to go by, and we all got those, eh? Another smile. Bannock found himself warming to the talkative gunner. Let's go aft, meet the others. Watch out you don't trip on the rails, they're for the shell sled to the demolisher up front. They took a few steps up to the rear of the tank, passing a pair of votive recesses, wherein sat small effigies of the Emperor and the servo skull of the Omnitia. Next to that, a wall of tarnished brass plaques, the decorative framing of which was obscured by crumbling parchment, Adeptus Mechanicus seals, medals on aged dark ribbons and ancient dog tags. What's this? Asked Bannock. Wall of Honor, said Radon, as if that explained it, and pressed ahead into the gloom. This is the shell locker. They stuck their heads in through a tiny doorway, the sliding door already open. A low room greeted them, evidently the part of the tank directly beneath the tech station above. 2 men with bulging arms, also stripped to their vests, sat playing cards on upturned crates, squeezed into the tiny space between the shell racks, choking out what little oxygen there was with cheroot smoke. Which, even though there was no exposed explosive material, was completely against regulations. Munitions of various sizes stood in racks on the walls, the room so small and the shells so big that the detonation caps were less than half a meter apart. At the front of the compartment, which Bannock judged to be more or less the exact center across the width of the tank, stood the base of the shell elevator, a tube with a closable slot big enough to take 2 rounds of the tank's meter-long battle cannon shells. This is the magazine, the most heavily armored part of Mars Triumphant. Makes sense, eh? We call it the shell store, Ganlick boombox. Doesn't matter does it, as long as we all know what we're talking about, eh? Thesey, Megan and Ralt, that young un there with the clipboard is Marcelo. Ralt and Marcelo are Clan Megan too, said Radin, pointing at their matching clan markings, but it gets too damn confusing having 3 loaders with the same name, so they go by their mother names. And I was here first, said the original of the 3 Megans, his voice deep and gravelly, a surefire sign of long-time LHO addiction. Ralph grunted his hello without taking his eyes off the cards on the crate. Marcello forced his way past the other loaders, however, and shook Bannock warmly by the hand. He was significantly younger than the rest of the tankers, his biological age couldn't have been more than 20 or so. See, he's the keen one. He's not been with us long, picked him up to replace the last 3rd loader we had, man by the name of Atralis. Atrellan, grunted Ralph. Yeah, that was it. You forget, after a while. He's the youngest, new recruit we picked up from Doston, Paragon Colony IV, not far out from the Dentes Belt, a few years back. Wouldn't normally take someone this young, but there wasn't much choice at the mining station. We'd had heavy casualties and the top brass didn't want any tank crew entirely made up of greenhorns, so we got lumbered. The battle group got about 500 guys sick of mining, we got him. The young tanker ignored Radin's chatter. Lieutenant, sir, welcome to Mars Triumphant, I'm looking forward to serving with you. If you can show me the ropes, I'd appreciate it, said Bannock. That targeting suite's like nothing I have ever seen before. Of course, sir. The kid's face lit up. Young, isn't he? Told you, said Radin. Right, introductions over, this way, the honored lieutenant's waiting. A pace past the shell locker, and the corridor turned 90 degrees and became a shallow alcove. The roof thereafter dipped to form a crawl space running under Mars's massive power plant. Jammed into the alcove were 2 men, oblivious to the furnace heat radiating from the reactor. Bannock was starting to wish he could take his uniform jacket and shirt off, his collar felt 2 sizes smaller than normal. Just make sure they don't burn up again, one of the men was saying. Those fires are a damn distraction. If one goes down in a storm we'll all choke to death in here, am I clear? Said one. He had no cap or rank badges on. Like the rest of the tankers he was only wearing his vest in the hot interior, but Bannock immediately recognized him as Courtine, there was no mistaking it. Yes, sir, but I can't rush it. Perhaps if I can get one of the higher adepts to look at it properly and placate them, said the second, a much smaller man, smaller even than Radin, crouched in the crawlway entrance. He wore the deep red robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, stained deeper with sweat and oil, his large eyes blinking often. I'll speak to Brasslock, just see what you can do, Vorkosigen. Get it fixed and stop talking about the damned spirits. That's not your realm, this is. He kicked the engineer's toolbox. If anyone is going to be praying, it's not going to be you. Last thing I need is the Mars going down because you missed tightening a nut and messed up one of the rituals, you understand? The little man nodded morosely. Now, Radin, back with the new boy already? Yes, sir, Lieutenant Coloron Artem Low Bannock. This is honored Lieutenant Courtine. Bannock found himself staring at a shoulder tattoo to match his own. Courtine followed his gaze. I'm of Clan Bannock, lad, or I was. I left all that behind a long time ago, said Courtine. Courtine is your matronymic. Bannock spoke rapidly, nervous. Courtine was a minor hero back home. I have met your brother, sir, he worked with my father. Have you now? I suggest you think about dropping Bannock, too. There's probably 1,000 Bannocks within 500 meters of this post. It's going to drive the brass crazy trying to tell us all apart, 500,000 Paragonian from 5 regiments in this war zone, with only 150 clan names to go around. Hard enough to know who's who if you're from Paragon. Your loyalty is to the Emperor first and only, and not to either Paragon or your clan. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, oh I like that. I like that very much. Keep that up and I might even grow to like you. Now, I'd get yourself familiarized with your station. We're mobilizing soon. He gave Bannock a look. Sir. Lieutenant, get out of my way. Bannock glanced across at the walls pressing in either side of him. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. He and Radin backed away. Sir. What? I wanted to say thank you for bringing me aboard. Don't thank me, boy, you've got to prove yourself to me yet. Well, whom do I thank? This is a great honor, said Bannock as civilly as he could. This commander was not behaving in a manner befitting the rank. He fought his irritation. His pride had wrecked his life back on Paragon and he tried to quash it, but it was in his blood. If you feel the need to give thanks, thank the tank. Bannock frowned. Sir. Cortine laughed. I didn't choose you, boy, Mars Triumphant did, or so the tech priests say. Cortine pushed his way past. Radon said they ought to go and sign Bannock into his billet. Not that you'll ever use it, the first gunner added. This is home now. Something made Bannock uneasy as he reached the ladder to the main deck. He turned before he ascended, and caught Tech Adept Vorkosagen staring hard at him. The little man was almost lost in the darkness, but there was no mistaking the look of hostility on his face. He held an Emperor's Tarot deck in his hand, a small black box with a single button and a screen to display its spread. The box rattled as it ran through a reading and stopped. Without looking at it or taking his eyes off Bannock, Vorkosagen went back into the recess under the engine of Mars Triumphant. Chapter 10. KALIDARIV, VORSANII Aridity 3,289,397, M41. There they are, green Bazdaks. Ganlik spat over the side of the Salamander scout vehicle and offered his magnoculars to Bannock. He was disappointed to be away from the Baneblade so soon. He'd hoped to have got himself a little more acclimatized to the 3rd Gunnery Station's fire control systems. But he and Ganlik had been sent out a day ahead of the Baneblade to check their target, a medium-sized mining complex overrun by the Orcs. Ganlik pulled a stick of high-energy wafer out of his top pocket. He offered it to Bannock, who waved it away. Ganlik shrugged. Suit yourself, he said, and offered it to the 3 crew in the back of the scout tank and the Savler accompanying them. They too declined his offer, intent on their instruments. The 4 crew of the Salamander had made it obvious they thought the tankers completely surplus to requirements, and were insulted by the implication that Cortine didn't trust them to do their job, though they seemed even less at ease with the Savler observer. They barely spoke, and had not even offered their names. Bannock was inclined to agree with their stance. The wisdom of sending 2 of the Super Heavy's crew out in front of their task force was suspect, but when he'd circumspectly asked Ganlik about this, the veteran tanker had just growled at him. Radon had been right about the 2nd gunner. He didn't talk much, leaving Bannock alone with his thoughts on the Salamander. Why had Cortine sent him ahead? To test him. Radon had said something about Cortine wanting his own report on the target, but why 2 of them? It was dangerous, thought Bannock. Well, ain't you all a bunch of miserable Bazdaks, grumbled Ganlik and stuffed the declined food up underneath his respirator masking. I need a piss, he said. He jumped over the far side of the Salamander's crew compartment. The sound of water striking the sand followed, along with a satisfied gasp. Bannock had the magnocular's magnification up to maximum, multiple filtration subfunctions within him working hard to clear the scene below of whirls of dust curling in the lazy night wind. The minehead appeared in the grainy green of light amplification, ghost light trailing off the spotlights the Orcs had set up on its structure as he panned from left to right. The installation was set into a broad pit 10 kilometers across. The majority of the mine comprised a tall gantry, some of which had collapsed in on itself. Low buildings lay half buried in the sand around it. This hasn't been used for a long time, said Bannock as Ganlik rejoined him. Well done, said Ganlik sarcastically. Pocket geologian are we now? It's been off the books for about 60 years. That's why the Orcs got in so close. Everyone forgot it was there. Easy to hide in a crater, said Bannock. You could hide 4 armies anywhere on this rock. No comms, no sats, no pict, no vox, just noise. And it's not a crater, boy, said the big surly man, putting his magnoculars back up to his face. It's subsidence. The crystals form in veins in the sand. The ones lower down, they're older. The sand at that depth is pressed into soft rock, like under the hives. That's where the big crystals are, the most valuable. The newer ones grow in sand that's still loose. Machines work out in spiral from the installation there. Scoop them up, chuck the spoil round the rim, move on, sand sinks in the middle. So, looks like a crater, but ain't a crater. Bannock did not challenge him on this. The Ganlik clan were Paragon's foremost mining people, busy deep in the many mountains dragged up by Mater Maxima's gravitage grasp on the moon world. Even a lowborn clansman like Ganlik would have a deep knowledge of the industry. And, like Radon had said of the surly 2nd gunner, he had a knack for finding things out. I'll be glad of this. Ganlik grasped at his talisman, a lump of ore, hammer purified, decorated with the sail quills of a desert sandpike. There's always a resonance round these old workings, I've been told. Kaladar's got it all: dust storms, sandpike, angry sandscum, greenies and ghosts. Bannock scoffed. That's nonsense. That thing cost you a month's pay, at least according to Radon. Radon's a Bazdak, doesn't know anything. Some of it is nonsense, granted, but Lorelei crystals, boy, they're only reason we're here. All about this planet, running through it like silver in the mountains, product of the startide from that big blue Bazdak in the sky. What, you think the orcs came here cause the sky is green like them? No, without this stuff, all that hoodoo the Scholastica domeheads pull off wouldn't work half so well. Bannock looked at him uncomprehendingly. It's witch stuff, city boy, said Ganlik, as if he were lecturing an idiot. They put it in their rods and relays. Lorelei has a psychoactive matrix, and some of the best of it comes from here. Why by holy terror do you think we're on this sandbox? Why do you think there's so many of his loyal citizens toiling away here? Lorelei, it's the only reason any of us are here at all, and why the brass don't bomb it from orbit and start all over again. I'll bet it's the same for the greenskins. This medallion's made out of some charged ore or other, fragments of the Lorelei in it, wise. Shorts out any residual activity, stops you seeing the ghosts. Lorelei's to blame for that too. Sandscum use M, stops M going mad. Lesson for you there, new meat, always talk to the natives. I see, said Bannock. No you don't, said Ganlik. Emperor, you know, Courtine sent you out here with me because he trusts what I can find out and he wanted to see what you do. The report I've got in my head is not shaping up in your favor. Bannock bit back his annoyance. Ganlik was enjoying speaking to him, a lieutenant, like this. Courtine had made it very clear to all aboard that, while under his command, Bannock was to be treated as of third gunner ranking, and not lieutenant, until he'd proven himself. For all practical purposes, everyone on Mars Triumphant bar the loaders outranked him. It made sense, Bannock had a lot to learn, but with Ganlik it was proving irksome. We're done here, said one of the scouts in surly fashion. We have the necessary data. We need to report back. The scout handed Ganlik an auspex. The big man flicked through the picts the men had gathered and grunted in affirmative. Wait, the Savler spoke for the first time all day. Bannock found the Savler a strange people, their eyes hard, their skin seamed with unidentifiable dirt. They had a chemical odor to them, as if they washed in something other than water, if they washed at all. Radon had told him Savler was a hole of a world, awash with deadly pollutants. They're thieves, dregs, Radon had said. Keep your kit close to you when they're about. Those bulky respirators they never take off. Nitrochem inhalers in M. Stay out of their way in a fight, they can't tell green from man when they're in the gas fugue. They're here because they're survivors. They don't raise them often, too difficult to control, only get M in for places like this. That's how fragged we are. The Savler dialect of Gothic was so thick that Bannock could only catch one in 3 words. Thankfully, their companion at least switched to a form of standard Low Gothic when speaking to him and Ganlik. Let we wait, he said, his voice sibilant. I have no signal from my Savler command to tell main raider group in place, yes. We go now, we risking very nasty surprises. We go now, I outer range, no confirm. Ganlik caught the man eyeing his medallion speculatively. He narrowed his eyes and shook his head, and shoved the ugly thing down his tunic top. The Savler held his gaze for a while, and looked away. Sir, said the Paragonian scout. Bannock looked to Ganlik. You're the lieutenant, said the big man. Courtine said. We're not on board Mars Triumphant now, are we? Bannock hesitated, then nodded. He's right, no signal, and we're not going in. We wait. They watched then, under the crackling aurora of the Kaladar night. The wind stilled entirely, dropping off as the temperature plummeted. The change was making the Paragonian scouts nervous. Visibility was improving, and the growing temperature differentials would make them an easy spot on broad spectral imaging equipment. Bannock had to admit he'd been grateful to find the orcs did not possess that facility naturally, and that in fact their eyesight was poor all round. There's something going on down there, said Ganlik. The scouts joined the 2 tankers on the track housing. The door to the facility, reworked to resemble a fanged maw by the orcs, swung open, its groan shattering the desert silence. Light from inside flooded out. A line of fast buggies roared out on broad tires, their engines puttering in the distance, and swung away towards the south. Minutes passed. The door remained wide. A big party of orcs, 100 or more, came out onto the sand. They dragged pierced oil barrels with them and set a broad semicircle of fires within and round the facility entrance. Smaller greenskins the size of children ran to and fro, bringing out barrels of liquor and food. The voices of the orcs rumbled out across the sand. They drank and became louder, discharging weapons into the air. The small greenskins roasted something in the fires, ignoring the squeals as others of their number were baited by the orcs. One held head down over the flames himself, eliciting great hilarity from the larger Xenos as it wriggled and screamed. "Nice party," grunted Ganlik. "Bazdak greenskins." Then came the men, a line of them, perhaps 50 or so, yokes holding neck and hands, chained together. No respirators or goggles. They stumbled as they walked, urged on by the whips of more orcs laughing behind them. They were driven into a circle of whooping orcs. Bannock had to stop himself swearing aloud as one of the green giants ran in and kicked a man so hard in the ribs he flew back 3 meters and collapsed in the dust. He did not get up again. The other orcs were angered by this, and the aggressor was roundly beaten by his fellows as the remaining humans were kicked and shoved into a cage whose bars were lined with jagged barbs. Bannock soon learned why. He'd wasted one of their toys. More orcs came up from inside, dragging horrific implements, cruel spikes, tables lined with hook and blade. They selected one of the captives and dragged him out. Human screams, thinned by distance, joined the noise of the orcs. "Throne," Bannock muttered. "Throne." He realized he was saying it over and over again. "See the green ones, see them play," said the Savler in a sing-song voice. "Best not be taken by them, see." He looked on at the carnage with dead eyes, appearing more curious than anything else. Bannock wondered what kind of world could make a man that unfeeling. "Glad it's not me, I am. Thank the Golden One it's not me. Greenies are not like in the book, officer man. Not like the book at all." There was a hiss from within the Savler's bulky breathing apparatus. He sighed and his eyes took on a glaze. "The infantryman's uplifting primer." The Savler giggled. "Not fit for burning," said Ganlik. "Those Bazdaks can grow 8 feet tall and more. They can pull the head off a man as soon as think about it, and they don't do much thinking. Takes a lot to kill them. The book's full of crap." Out into the night, where the sands were painted vividly by the shifting waves of Kaladar's tortured electromagnetic field, a bright star burst quietly. "He, signal star," said the Savler. "No Vox, no good here. See, greenskins 2GWOOP to notice, too cruel," he said, lapsing entirely into his own version of battered Gothic for a space, then. "Now we go, yes, Lieutenant Sir." Bannock managed to tear his eyes away from the horrors in the basin below. He had to swallow back bile before he could speak. "Your men are in place." "Oh yes, signal star say so. My Savler brothers, they no let down, they deep in transit tunnels, like back home Savler, atomics ready to go they are, as soon as they fight into Orc Nest. And all they need is a diversion," said Bannock. He checked his timepiece, embedded in the back of his leather gauntlet. "We've got an hour before they move in. We'd better make sure there's no welcoming party for them. Let's head back to the rendezvous point." Ganlik put down his magnoculars. "Aye to that." Mars Triumphant's engine growled and the main deck shook. "Steady as she goes, Outlander," said Courtine. "Reduce speed to 2/3. Courtine flung the levers on the heading wheels, the bell rang. "Keep us in line with the support. Eperaliant, get on the signals, we're being outpaced again." Eperaliant nodded and took his headset off. The night was so clear they'd probably be able to raise the fleet if they wanted to, but Courtine had ordered Vox silence until they hit the escarpment. Eperaliant clambered up into the turret, signal lamp in hand. "The Orc encampment will come into view any time now, sir," said Radon eagerly over the Vox. "Shall I open fire as soon as?" "Wait for my orders, Radon, they've not got notice of us yet. Let's get everyone in line, shall we? I want this little operation to go with minimum bloodshed, no point trying to lift spirits if we lose half our men. Remember, we're here to restore the battle group's faith in the 7th. Losing Lux Imperator was a great blow to morale, we need to show that the rest of us have what it takes." Courtine risked a few coded data squirts, their carrier waves tuned near as could be to Kaladar's background radiation, ordering the other vehicles into attack formation. 2 Lemon Russes flanked the tank, both standard armed with battle cannon and heavy bolters. The 3 tanks approached the spoil rim around the sunken mine pit, the Lemon Russ slowing to 1/3 to match the Super Heavy's speed, trusting that the Orcs' noise would cover their advance. "Outlander, halt. Eperaliant, do we have a ready signal from Lieutenant Strenkelios?" "Sir," replied Eperaliant over the internal Vox. "They're in place, but I can see them." "Then signal them back. When we come over the depression rim, I want them completely hidden from view, that way the orcs will get the full benefit of our surprise. The Atraxian heavy infantry were holding a position half a kilometer back from the spoil rim, just one platoon, but heavy infantry well equipped with carapace armor. 5 chimeras backed him up, and a further Lemon Russ, the surprise. In place of its battle cannon, the tank mounted a Punisher Gatling cannon, a horrendous weapon capable of wreaking great havoc on infantry. Their rarity on Kaladar was much lamented. The orcs in the mine were a fast company, mounted in light buggies and other vehicles that could swoop in, attack and be away again before the Imperials could react. They were a thorn in the side of the Imperial effort, harrying recovery teams trying to claim back wrecked vehicles from the Kostoval Flats. With the planet's subterranean transit network as fiercely contested as the surface, and air transit nigh on impossible in the unpredictable weather, overland routes were the only option for supply convoys, and these were being mercilessly targeted by the Orcs' light vehicle columns, guided onto them by means command could not fathom. I don't need to remind you that destroying this nest has been designated an A+ priority by command. It's a victory we need after that disaster at the Flats. We've been through worse before, men, said Courtine, and Mars Triumphant has seen much, much worse. He patted the ceiling of the compartment. We draw him out, we draw them away, give those Savla scum time to get in underneath them and blow the green Bazdaks into the warp and back. Any remnants, we lead onto Strenkilio's men. The orcs won't be able to resist us, we're big but we're alone, a worthy foe but an isolated one, a combination of strength and weakness that'll have them scrambling over each other to get at us. That's the trap, let's not spoil this now. Do me proud. Aye, sir, echoed the men. Come down, Eperalient, I need you here. Comms silence is broken in the attack group as of now. Sound the order, we advance. Outlander, take us over the rim, now. For Paragon. Aye, sir, echoed the men. For the Emperor. Aye, sir. For the greater glory of Mars Triumphant. Aye, sir. The light in the main deck shifted to red, signifying combat stations. The engine of Mars Triumphant roared out a challenge, daring any greenskin that might be listening to come and try their luck. With a lurch, the behemoth rumbled forwards on Kaladar's hard sands, up the spoil line and into full view of the Orc base, a Lemon Russ flanking either side. Gentlemen, we have 32 minutes until the Savla detonate their atomic mines. Fire at will, make as much of a rumpus as you can. Radin, throw one down the throat of that mess and see what it pukes out. He stabbed his hand into the holo of the mine head door, and targeting information sprang up on the gunnery station's screens. Bannock and Marcello sat side by side, each one controlling a sponson. Bannock peered at the tank's screens on his station. The weight of the machine's systems pressed in on his consciousness, lending it physical presence as if he sat in a cave with a bear. The tank rumbled forwards in the dawn light, battle cannon spitting rocket-propelled shells as it went. The Lemon Russes joined their own deadly shouts to Mars Triumphant's song of destruction. The heavy bolters were not in range, so Bannock set to picking off lone orcs with his lascannon. Through the magnification of his weapon's auger eyes, he saw the drunken Xenos stumbling to their feet, gesticulating and shouting. Several turned to run inside. Bannock wondered how they could survive without respirators. Ganlik was right, they were tough. That won't help them, he thought, as he vaporized one of the foul things with a last blast. He caught sight of the caged and tortured men in the cap and hatred filled his heart. He set to his task with grim satisfaction. Shells exploded amid the Xenos. Sand erupted into the air, the orcs were in uproar. Then there were orcs everywhere. A stream of buggies, bikes and other constructions came pouring out of the mine's mouth. Radin's shots took their toll as they emerged, but there were scores of them, and they rapidly closed with the heavy Imperial vehicles. Bannock and Marcello opened up with the 6 heavy bolters at their command. Burning wreckage bounced through the desert, but still the vehicles came on. Well done, said Courtine. That poked them. Steady as we go. Prepare for all back 1/3. Let's give it 5 more minutes then begin to draw them away. Convey my order to our support, Eperalient. Bannock's view tracked over the caged prisoners again. He squinted. There, movement. He zoomed in, picture shuddering. Honored Lieutenant. Wait. Bannock, what is it? Quadrant 5, movement, non-orcoid. Said Bannock. Human prisoners, they're still alive. He threw up a pict onto the comms desk main screen. Emperor's teeth, what have they done? Asked Courtine. At least 10 of the men were still alive, trapped in the cage. Maybe we can fire, open a hole in the cage, said Bannock. Negative, it's too small a target. We'll kill him, said Marcello. Perhaps we'd better, it'd be a mercy. Cortine spoke. Damn it, there must be a way. Eperaliant yelled. We have to stay clear of the mine. The ground's too soft down there to support us. We'll become mired. Let's give them a clean end and commend their souls to our protector. I'm not suggesting risking this machine for the sake of a few men, Eperaliant, but there are other ways, said Cortine firmly. He chewed his lip. That salamander, boy, how fast is it? Fast, said Bannock. Get it out here. Cortine magnified a pict of the area, pulling up the cage on his chart desk. He transmitted a data squirt with rapid finger motions across his command suite. Tank 2, cover that salamander when it comes in. I want a wall of fire around it, nothing gets through to harm it. Incoming, shouted Eperaliant. The Baneblade shook as if it had been kicked by one of the Orc's vile gods, Bannock having to grab at his station to avoid being thrown to the floor. Lights flickered. Eperaliant looked to the ceiling expectantly, but no further blows came. Damage report, shouted Cortine. All systems functioning in the green, honored Lieutenant. We've got some energy spiking round Demolisher fire control, but it'll hold, said Vorkossigen, his ever-present tarot reader swinging on a cord by his head. Don't risk it, Vorkossigen. Switch to auxiliary, said Cortine. Vorkossigen replied, switching to auxiliary. Ganlik, you'll be offline for 4, 3, 2, 1, back online. What the, said Marcello, eyes wide. From out of the mouth of the mine came a hulking Orc battle fortress, a huge Orc armored vehicle borne on 8 fat, metal wheels. Bigger than the Baneblade, it bristled with weapons poking out of gunports lined with the crude glyphs of Orc kind. A massive turret followed the super heavy's movement, gunsmoke pouring from its barrel. 3 smaller cannons manned by smaller greenskins spoke next. Triple impacts banged out a tattoo on the hull. We'll have to take that out for Strenkilio's sake. We don't want to draw that up towards the infantry, said Cortine. Steady Marcello, don't panic, it's no match for Mars Triumphant. Outlander, forward armor to main target. Cortine designated the Orc battle fortress as such, targeting information relayed to the gunners' stations. Take it down. All the men spoke now, busy with their tasks, a constant, unhurried chatter that filled the tank, detailing everything they were doing. Cortine heard him all, despite the roar of the engine and the crash of cannon fire, replying, ordering, conducting them like an orchestra, Mars Triumphant responding smoothly to the crew's prompting. Tanks 2 and 3, concentrate on the smaller vehicles. The battle fortress is ours. Eperaliant, where's that damned salamander? I want those men out of there. They're on their way, sir. The crew are not pleased, said Eperaliant. I'll have them up on charges if they're not here within 3 minutes. Make that clear to them. Get them down here now. Yes, sir. And request Lieutenant Strenkilios move his Atraxians to the ridge. The ambush is off, repeat, off. He can get his target practice from the ridge edge. The main cannons of Mars Triumphant spoke in unison, striking hard at the battle fortress, yet despite its ramshackle construction it was tough and came on, its bestial snout panting fire as it rumbled forwards. Damn thing's got armor thick as Grok's skin, shouted Radon, stitching magnesium tracer across its front, following it with a shot from the main cannon. We're down to 2 shells up here. Ralt, more ammo, called Megan. Behind Bannock the shell elevator rattled as more ammunition was sent up top by the loader down below. Bannock, sweep off those Gretchen from the cannons, said Radon. Gretchen. The little greenskins. Keep the smaller guns out of commission while we load up again, explained the main gunner. Bannock did as he was asked, raking the gunports with heavy bolter fire. It drove the Gretchen back, but no matter how many of the skinny greenskins exploded, there always seemed to be more. He switched to lascannon and burnt out a gunport. There was an orange flash from within, and the cannon fell silent. Good shot, shouted Radon, deafening Bannock over the vox with his excitement. Now watch this. The main gun of Mars Triumphant boomed. The side of the battle fortress exploded in flame and 2 of its wheels flew off, slowing it considerably, although it did not halt. The duel began in earnest, the titanic vehicles circling each other as buggies and tracks buzzed ineffectually around them. Shot after shot went between the 2 tanks, to little effect. Doesn't this Bazdak have a weak point? Said Radon. I'm on it, Radon. Give me some time, said Eperaliant. Bannock listened intently to the chatter, his own eyes firmly on tack feed and gun cameras. He tracked the left lascannon a full 180 degrees, so that it pointed directly to the rear. Through the weapon's eye he caught sight of a trio of light half-tracks carrying rocket launchers lining up to blast Mars triumphant from behind. He annihilated them one after the other with bolts of searing light. "Keep it up, Bannock," said Corteen, in between his endless stream of orders, his fingers dancing over his command suite. "Keep him off the power plant." A huge orc appeared atop the battle fortress, poking out of a turret hatch, a power claw the size of a man on its left hand. It gesticulated and roared as its tank shot at the Baneblade, a bald challenge. "There, got it," said Epiraliant. "Logic engine suggests this spot. Check your Auspex, data coming up now." "Doesn't look like much, Ganlik," said Radin. "Ready for your mark," replied the second gunner. "Load up app, Radin," said Corteen. "Load app," said Radin. "Loading app," said Megan. In the turret, Radin kissed his hand and slapped the shell as Megan pushed it home. "Right sponson Lascannon offline," said Marcello. Power lines. Don't fire so often, allow 2 breaths between, you're overstressing the shunts." Tech Adept Vorkosigen began a low chant as he attempted a reroute on the weapon. "Ready," said Radin. "Ready," repeated Ganlik. "Fire," said Corteen. Radin's shell arced through the air, burying itself deep in the orc vehicle, Ganlik's close in behind. The orc warleader had time enough for one more defiant roar before he and his tank were obliterated in a hemisphere of fire and metal fragments. "Target destroyed, good work," said Corteen. "Time check." 17 minutes to detonation, said Epiraliant. "Where's that damn salamander?" Epiraliant checked over his instruments. "They've taken a hit." He pushed his mouthpiece in close and voxed them urgently. A voice, drowning in static, came back faintly. 30 meters behind us. We don't have time. We've done our job. Let's pull out." "We shall commend our fallen to the Emperor," said Bannock quietly. "We'll make time," said Corteen. "I want those men out of there." Bannock thought for a moment, watching the green silhouettes of orc light vehicles dance round his scope like fireflies. What should he do? He thought back to his youth, to the statue. What would that man do, the hero Corteen, if he could? He spoke up. "Sir, I'll go. I'll drive it." "Will you now?" "Yes, sir, if the Emperor wills it." Corteen appraised him for a long second. "I have known both pious fools and saints in my time. Which are you?" "Sir." Corteen thought rapidly, came to a decision. "Go to it. Be quick. You've now 15 minutes. Outlander, back us out of here, 2/3 speed, concentrate all fire forwards, Mauser's pattern. Marcello, cover our backs." Bannock nodded a thanks to Corteen, and clambered up into the turret and out the top instead, ignoring Radin's questions as he went. He leapt down from the turret as it swung round, onto the roof of the main deck, then over the side of the track guard. It was a 3.5-meter drop, but Kaladar's gravity was low and he took the impact with a roll. He was up on his feet and running towards the salamander before he knew it. The roar of the Baneblade's engine was terrifying outside the tank. Guns and turrets swiveled this way and that, spitting fire and death, devastating the orcs. A wagon full of orcs came caroming through the night, then another and another. One took a hit from the Baneblade, spinning it to one side. The entire machine toppled over, spilling orcs across the sand. They picked themselves up and ran on, towards the spoil rim. Strenkelios and his troops had arrived. A disciplined line of stormtroopers took up station along the depression rim to rain lasgun fire down on the orcs, chimeras at their flanks. The night lit up as a plasma gun sent a small sun burning through the air. It struck and exploded in a miniature nova that immolated an orc biker, droplets of molten steel pattering onto the desert, fused sand glowing hot in the crater left behind. The trucks disgorged their cargo, and the orcs ran up the banking. Many died, but several got in close, hurling men this way and that before they were brought down, Strenkelios at the front, ordering new fire patterns as he decapitated a greenskin with his sword. More orcs came in from the mine. Bannock ran on, the salamander almost in reach. The Lemon Russ Punisher roared up and over the edge of the depression, its Punisher barrel powering up. The tank halted, weapon swinging round. It was pointed right at Bannock. He hit the deck as it fired. Thousands of white hot shells scored trails in the night, so bright they left tracks on Bannock's vision. The bullet storm stopped as quickly as it had begun and Bannock glanced behind him to see a wet slick of orcish parts spread in a wide cone behind him. He gave silent thanks and scrambled forwards onto the salamander. The commsman lay curled at the foot of his instruments in a pool of his own guts. The commander was missing. The gunner lolled on the floor, trying to staunch the flow of blood coming from a nasty shrapnel wound in his arm. Bannock checked him quickly. "Hold on," he shouted into his ear, then pushed his way through the door into the enclosed drive compartment. The driver lay slumped at the controls, dead. Bannock shoved him to one side and took his place. "Emperor, lend me speed," he thought. "If not for me, for those men the orcs would have killed." He slammed the salamander into forward gear, gunning its overcharged engines as hard as he dared. It jumped forwards, the hard-packed sand almost as good as a road. Free of heavy armor, the Chimera variant was light enough to keep pace with the orc buggies. Several of these peeled away from harassing the Baneblade and gave chase, wild shots from their heavy stubbers hammering off the vehicle. A thump, and Bannock was face to face with a leering orc face pushing and snapping at the vision slit, before it was snatched away. A buggy attempted to outpace him, its cackling gunner bringing rockets round to fire right at the front of the salamander, but a lascannon bolt from the right cut it in half, and Bannock's borrowed vehicle bounced as it ran over the wreckage. 8 minutes. The sand softened to the center of the depression, slowing the scout tank. 500 meters to go. The salamander burst through the fence surrounding the prisoner's cage. Bannock wrenched back on a drive lever, shutting one of the track units off, spinning the vehicle round. He pushed himself out of the seat and leapt over the dead driver. He tried to ignore the sight of the tortured men pinned to poles about the enclosure. The scent of burned human flesh assailed him through his rebreather. He flew as he ran to the cage door. He pulled his las pistol from its holster and shot a cowering Gretchen that stood hissing by the cage door. The men looked at him in surprise. They stood. They'd had their limbs freed from the yokes, and had the sense to tear some of their uniforms off and wrap them round their faces. Perhaps they'd avoid the dust lung. There were about 12 of them. 3 shots and the lock was broken. 6 minutes. Everyone out. The men needed little encouragement, those least hurt helping the others. "Get these men down," shouted Bannock as the uninjured guardsman piled the wounded men into the back of the salamander, dragging the dead body of the commsman out and leaving him on the sand. 2 captives, severely wounded, were brought down quickly, screaming as their brutalized flesh tore further. Bannock quickly scanned round the enclosure. 8 more men were dead, 3 more living, but so enwrapped in spike and chain he had no chance to bring them down in time. Bannock grimaced as he shot each one in the head. Eyes gouged out, noses cut off, skin flayed. As he gave the Emperor's benediction, his hatred for the orcs hardened. "Let's go," he shouted, waving the men onto the vehicle. The tank was designed for 5 to work without hindrance, but there was just enough space for the 12 men to cram in. "The mine is going up." He boarded the salamander and pushed his way roughly into the drive compartment. 4 minutes. The salamander was slower than before, weighed down by extra men, its tracks turning less surely on the softer ground at the heart of the depression, but it was quick enough. The mutilated corpses of their comrades were soon behind the escaping guard, the spire of the mining installation growing smaller and smaller. As they hit the harder packed ground towards the edge of the depression, the salamander's speed increased rapidly. In the back, the guardsmen ransacked storage bins for rebreathers, and clung on for their lives. 1 minute. Bannock swerved the salamander round the wrecks of orc buggies. There were only a few left functioning, buzzing round the larger tanks like gnats. The fighting was coming to an end. The orcs were finished. Bannock checked his timepiece and pressed the drive levers for the vehicle's twin engines forwards as far as he could. 10, 9, 8, 7. He drove past one of the lemon russes, making with all speed to the crater rim. The other was already creeping up and over. 6, 5. Strenkilio's men had fallen back, leaving naught but green corpses to show they had been there. 4. He shot past Mars Triumphant, its hull going past in a blur. The spoil rim grew nearer and nearer. 3, 2, 1. A low, rumbling boom passed through the tank, a low-frequency shockwave that made the metal of the vehicle buzz. The ground bucked under the salamander as the entire floor of the depression heaved up in a bulge, then dropped. The engines screamed as Bannock pushed the scout tank up and out of the sinking depression, sand pouring back past it into the deepened hole. He gained the rim, and pushed the tank up and out of the danger zone. The second lemon russ followed a second later, toppling towards safety. Out over on the other side, Bannock jammed the brakes on hard, and the vehicle struggled to a halt, engines stinking of burning oil. Bannock shoved his way out of the scout tank and ran up the pseudo-crater wall. He had to see what had happened to Mars Triumphant. Inside the depression, the facility had disappeared. In its stead lay a sucking hole. Orc carcasses and wrecked vehicles flowed towards it, tumbling down on rivers of sand. Mars Triumphant hung at the edge of the collapse, meters away from the spoil rim. Its tracks turned implacably, the ground disappearing beneath it, fighting to keep position. "No!" shouted Bannock. The tank's engine howled, gears grinding raucously within its track units. Slowly, the Baneblade made ground, edging forwards, and pulled itself onto the base of the spoil rim wall. Bannock held his breath as it climbed out, one painful centimeter at a time. Then the mighty tank slipped, the ground under the right track unit gave way and it yawed alarming towards that side. The sand poured back faster than the tracks could turn. Mars Triumphant was pulled down into the rushing torrent of dust, buried up to its tracks, then its turret. Black smoke poured from its quad smokestacks as its mechanisms screamed. The rushing sand swallowed it whole. Bannock sank to his knees. The speed of the sand hissing into the altered landscape slowed. Aftershocks rumbled through the ground, the avalanche stilled. The Baneblade was gone. The cruelty of the God Emperor hit him like a hammer blow. He'd dishonored himself, tried to redeem his honor in the eyes of the Lord of Mankind, for Bannock believed fervently that he watched all the men that fought for him. To be picked to serve aboard a super-heavy tank, the very one commanded by the hero of his clan, seemed a vindication of everything he had put himself through, the leaving of home, the disapproval of his father, the loss of his friend, but no, it was not enough. Nothing could ever be enough for what he had done. This was all his fault, his doing. The Baneblade had been destroyed to punish him for breaking the codes of his clan, for the death of Tuparilio. He bowed his head in shame and prayed fervently for the souls of the men aboard the tank, and for the chance to expend his life as a useful servant of the Imperium. It was all he had, and all that he could give. He knew it for an inferior offering. Bannock remained that way for some time before he stood. Reluctantly, he quit the wall and walked down onto the desert floor. The sun was over the horizon now, the wind rising with it. In the distance a smudge of red hinted at another storm on its way. He was halfway back when mechanical thunder made him turn again. Mars Triumphant crested the wall of the mine depression, sand streaming from its flanks like water cascading from an ocean leviathan. It reared up high as it took the barrier, engines roaring, a beast bellowing its defiance to the universe, and came down hard. Once off the wall it leveled out, and growled to a stop in front of Bannock. Sand whispered onto the floor as it stood there, wide lights and augers regarding him, engine revs breathing. Bannock stared back. He saw Mars Triumphant briefly as the tech priests saw it, not just as a machine with a soul as most men would, a relic and reminder of the power and endurance of the Imperium, but as a living, breathing embodiment of the Emperor's will. It was like looking at a ragged preacher, and catching a glimpse of the holy fire of sainthood beneath the surface. Through the mighty machine's glass augers and optics, the Emperor could see him stood there, right then, pathetic on the sand. The living god of mankind, clad in armor of plasteel and adamantium, gazed through the machinery before Bannock and judged him. He was found wanting. Bannock fell to his knees, overwhelmed. A clang from above broke the spell, followed by a shout. Bannock stood and stepped back to see Radon's flame-haired head poke from the turret high above. "Bet you thought we were goners there, eh, new boy? Well, not us, not while we're riding this. Not while we've got Mars Triumphant." He laughed as he pounded the tank's armor, face bright with the glee of survival. He made the sign of the Aquila, raised his medallions to his lips and pressed loud kisses upon them. "Praise be," he shouted. "Praise be to the tech priests of Mars and all their screw-bothering mumblings. Ha!" Once news of their success had been conveyed to Battle Group HQ, Mars Triumphant and the other units had been ordered to stay put and wait for relief, so they waited and took stock of their casualties and vehicle damage. Shortly after the battle, a group of support staff from the 7th arrived in an Atlas tank, along with it engineers Braslock and Starston. 2 hours or so later, Medici and Munitorum teams arrived to resupply the group and take the wounded back to Hive Modulus. The last of the casualties were shipped out close to the end of the long Calidarian day, 18 hours since the morning when Bannock had watched Mars Triumphant haul itself out of the crater, and it was a crater now, the result of a 5-megaton portable atomic seeded in the depths of the disused mine. How many of the Savla had died fighting in the transit tunnels to place it there Bannock did not know, but having seen the orcs at work in the open twice now, he was developing a respect for the so-called dregs, no matter what was said about them. The crews of the tanks, their support vehicles and the platoon under Lieutenant Strenkelios had formed a camp, lookouts placed in a kilometer-wide cordon. Reinforcements were due to arrive later that day, a recon company with light vehicles who'd scour the surrounding area for outlying groups of greenskins while the attack group made its way back to Hive Modulus. The weather held, the storm moving away from the horizon. Bannock was assigned to Engineer Brasslock as he worked over the Baneblade, examining it in minute detail, Eartho his awesome shadow. "Do you hear it?" the engineer asked Bannock. "I hear the ticking of cooling metal, the creak of systems recently deactivated. I am sorry, but I hear nothing more." Bannock shuddered as he remembered how the tank had appeared after the battle. But now the presence within it had retreated, leaving only metal behind. Brasslock caught sight of this involuntary twitch, within his cowl ancient eyes creased with a smile and he nodded with approval. "On Paragon the cult of the Omnitia is strong, yes. Among the clan aristocracy and others, we depend on the beneficence of the machine god, yes." Bannock pulled out his cog and eagle. "He is second only to the Emperor in our prayers." Brasslock made a rasping noise Bannock supposed was a chuckle. "You are marked by the machine god." A metal tendril whipped out of the tech priest's robes and tapped Bannock's chest. "And you respect him, you have seen his glory now." Bannock nodded hesitantly. "Then continue to listen, and you will hear." Bannock cast his gaze up the side of the war machine, a metal wall that blocked out the merciless Caledarian sun. "What will I hear?" "That Mars triumphant is pleased with its choice. The machine spirit of the Baneblade is satisfied with your actions, not least in your saving of the little one." His cowled head gestured towards the salamander, currently being field repaired by a team of Munitorum specialists under the direction of an engineer. "All machines are sacred. They are brothers. Save one, and all are glad." The rest of the crew went over their own systems, Tech Adept Vorkoxygen running general diagnostics on a data slate independently of the engineer's efforts. As Bannock followed the ancient engineer round, he was glad he was in the shadow of Mars Triumphant, and not with the Atraxian stormtroopers, who labored in the full glare of the sun moving stinking orcish corpses into a pile for burning, necessary, so he'd been told, to stop their bodies shedding spores. He found it hard to credit, but leave them unburnt and a year later this area would be crawling with yet more greenskins. Further reinforcements came in 3 hours before sunset, honored Captain Hannock among them, and he and Courtine were locked in close consultation for the remainder of the day. The honored captain was surprisingly young, thought Bannock, much younger than Courtine. Later, as the fierce blue sun of Caladar burned its way into the horizon, they drank. The others welcomed Bannock now, praising his deeds in the battle. Yet he could not share their joy. His dishonor set him aside in his mind. He was sure that the near loss of the Baneblade was a warning to him, a reminder that the Emperor knew of his shame, that Mars Triumphant knew, even if his comrades did not. He could not rid himself of the image of the men broken by the orcs. Head swimming from the rough glees the men handed round the sealed crew tent, he made his excuses and went outside, walking without purpose to the edge of the encampment, resenting with every rubber-tainted breath the respirator he was forced to wear. Bannock stood at the edge of the desert, his breath noisy in his ears. He became lost in thought, watching the day die. "It is, in its way, a beautiful place," said a voice close by him. "Honored Lieutenant," Bannock said, snapping to attention. "At ease, Lieutenant, the time's not right for that now. The day is done, we won. Now we rest." Courtine came to stand by him. Like Bannock, he had his officer's cap and coat on against the cold. They could have been 2 gentlemen soldiers of their clan, taking the air at a Paragonian desert resort, were it not for the reek of spilt fuel and orc corpses burning on the pyre. "A harsh beauty. This is so hard a planet," he said. "So hot, so cold. No soft edges, not like home." "No, sir." Courtine toed the sand with his boot. "You can never go back. It is a long time since I signed up. Paragon is not the world I left." Bannock nodded. Courtine's brother, whom he had met when he was very young, had died years ago, and he had been truly ancient, even by the aristocracy's standards. "Your raising took place in my grandfather's time. Time is bent out of shape by the warp," said Courtine. 24 jumps I've made, no more than 12 years total in the immaterium, yet over a century added outside, so 30 years of fighting becomes an age. Go home yourself, you'll see it change. It will not be the same." "I did not join to go home, sir." Courtine made an affirmative noise. "Few ever go back. I was lucky in a sense, unlucky in another. I joined to leave, sir, to serve my emperor as best I may." Courtine nodded. "I was like you once, I too waived my clan exemption." "I know, they still talk about it back home." "Really now? Well, there's a thing," said Courtine in a manner that suggested he'd had to sit through plenty of adulatory events on Paragon. "They have a statue to you in the Great Clan Hall." Courtine snorted. "I saw it. Doesn't mean much. I don't fight for glory, not anymore. What do you fight for? Cortine frowned, and did not answer immediately. I am no longer sure. I have seen worlds where men live and die in squalor, laboring on tasks they do not understand night and day for crumbs of food without succor. Our kind are beset on every side by all manner of evils. The orcs are the least of the horrors this universe has to show, believe me. I spent a decade fighting Eldar pirates, decadent scum who thrive on pain, worse than the orcs. What they'll do to men, women, children. The more blameless the better. Those sights, they never leave you. Bannock thought of the tortured men. He doubted he'd ever forget that. It would be some time before he'd be comfortable around the smell of roasting meat. He understood. Even they are not the worst. There are things out there that will eat your soul, and then there are those on our own side. He gave a low, mirthless chuckle. Some of them will dispose of you like a rag, tossing you aside when you have served your purpose. So, Brasslock has his machine god, the men their own reasons. But me, I fight because that is what I do, and I fight because we must. One of those Eldar degenerates, we managed to catch and interrogate one once. He laughed at us all the while, right until he died under the Chirurgeon's blades, said we were a crude mirror of what had happened to his own kind, long ago, that mankind was a lower creature doomed to a worse fate. And I will not have that. Perhaps he was right, perhaps the doomsayers are right, that these are the times of ending. You see it sometimes, the way the senior officers will gamble with men's lives. There is a certain weariness to it all, but I will not. For the High Lords the score of victory is measured in planetary systems, not in the survival of individuals, and it is all too easy to fall into such a mindset oneself. Hannick, for example, he's a good commander, but the machines are his charge, not the men. I took a dressing down from him today for risking Mars Triumphant, not for the first time. He said half of those we rescued will die from dust lung anyway, and he's probably right. If I may, asked Bannock hesitantly. Go ahead, please speak freely. Then why do it, sir? Because half will not die, and they can fight again. Cortine drew in a deep breath. To not fight is to hand victory to our enemies, yet to fight and abandon the spirit that makes us better than these evil creatures is worse than defeat. Men are men because they will risk themselves for one another. That is how we have spread across the stars. We look out for our own. If a single life can be saved, it should be. Every man with a gun in his hand is a bullet in the armory of the Emperor. Every man counts. He became fervent. We all must make the greatest sacrifice so that the Imperium may endure. Day by day billions die for the very survival of the human race, as I will surely die. To die for the Emperor is glory, for in each kilometer of ground bought by death lies hope for the survival of our kind. Death, boy, holds no fear for me, for the Emperor is at my side. But to throw away the lives of those who can also fight. To waste men and materiel simply because there is always more. That is a grave and odious sin, and I will not stand for it. It is by profligacy that we lose, for one day, if we cast away a tank here, a life there, on and on and on, then there will be no more. The mightiest edifice may be tumbled if it is carried away stone by stone. That, collar on Artem Low Bannock, is why I fight the way I do, and why sometimes I will take a calculated risk. They stood in silence for a space, the aurorae like warring ghosts in the sky above. Cortine turned to face the younger officer. Now, I am going for a drink. You will come too. You did well today, you deserve to rest. On board Mars Triumphant, we think for ourselves, and we fight for each other. That is why we win. Welcome to the crew, collar on Artem Low Bannock. Bannock followed his commander. He was glad he had not been asked his own reasons for fighting. He had no wish to describe his need for redemption. As Bannock came to the tent airlock, he caught the telltale rattle of a tarot deck. He looked towards Mars Triumphant, but saw nothing. Vorkosagen, he thought, only he carries that damn deck around. Without stopping to wonder why the little man was always watching him, Bannock went inside to sleep.